Hello and welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. You're here at episode 119, just one more to go to 120. I'm your co-host, Russ. Here on the other mic is Mike.
Mike on the mic, as the Beastie Boys once said.
As usual, we're here with our mix of 6 recordings, 3 classical and 3 jazz. Interesting music that you probably won't find talked about anywhere else.
Yeah, this time, we've got some pretty exotic stuff. And we are, I got to say, before we start this, we are feeling the weight of the weather.
Yes.
Here in Kyoto. It's really, I don't know what it is. It's kind of cloudy, but it's not raining. I don't know, there's kind of like a heaviness to it. It's muggy.
Yeah, there's another typhoon, as we spoke about in the previous episodes. There's another one that's coming through. Luckily, it's going south. It's going to miss most of the country, but it's bringing all that low pressure and precipitation through. And so yesterday into today was rainy. Tomorrow's going to be rainy, about 92% humidity.
Right. The humidity is really what it is, because it hasn't really rained. It was, they said rain all day, but it didn't rain. But it was just kind of horrible outside. I don't know. Both of us are pretty healthy guys. We're pretty much always ready to go. We don't get sick very often. But I noticed this week in the people around me, people were just like, sapped of energy and verve. They were kind of zombie-like. I think any health on our part is more just the luck of the draw with our genes as opposed to our lifestyles.
Could be.
I think sitting in a chair listening to music all day isn't really the gateway to health,
Right next to my speaker here, I've got a pull-up stand, so I'm over there doing some pull-ups a lot of times, so try to balance out the sitting with some exercise.
And I have a bicycle. That's about it. I just ride my bike everywhere.
Yeah, that's good too. In Japan we can do that. We're not a car dependent
it's a very bikeable place, Japan, you have to say.
But anyway, things are getting a little weird. It's that time of year, the rainy season and early typhoons, but we've got good music to bring us through everything. And I think we're going to like the interesting mix of tunes and songs and compositions we have both in classical and jazz tonight. And for all that music, when we get to it, you can find links to Spotify and Apple Music. If you haven't heard it yet, they'll be in the description for the episode there. There's also a full episode playlist where you can get all the music in one place on Deezer. That's a CD quality streaming platform from France that we usually prefer, but we're getting kind of irritated with this week.
We're getting irritated on the classical end. I have to say, they've been great until this year.
Yeah.
Suddenly around February, March, I started noticing, or Russ started noticing this, but I'm noticing it now too, so I'm using it more and more for classical music, that they're dropping like tracks from certain classical albums, and a lot of them too. I mean, there have been about over 10 now that I've noticed this in.
So the first recording you have tonight, it's got like 16 tracks on it, and I copied all of the track information because I want the full kind of
I make sure to do that too
from Presto that you sent me the link to.
I have to say, let me give a shout out to Presto Music because they're just fantastic with the way they I buy CDs from them. They're in England. And their listing too, their whole website is really well laid out, and
they're on the money 95% of the time. I found a few mistakes, but they're usually really good. So anyway, I had the list that I copied, and I sat down on my plush sofa, leather cushions, and I settled in, and I was going to take some notes when I was listening last Monday, and then I said, wait a minute, this is not the track that the list goes to. And then so I said, let me see, wait, okay, it's not there. And then the next track came up and it was out of sequence. Wait, I can't go on any further. It was so, out of sync. Not only were things misordered, but there were like 4 missing tracks.
But that one had 2 missing tracks on it, and they were misordered too. Yeah, there were 2. Because it had 16 tracks on the CD and there were 14 on Deezer.
Anyway, it's correct on Deezer now, so if you haven't listened to it, or even if you did listen to it, I fixed it in our playlist.
Oh, in our playlist.
In our playlist. Okay. So for our listeners, you can find it.
So our playlist is actually more accurate than Deezer's actually playlist. I actually wrote to them today. I said, you gotta get on this. We'll have to see what happens with that.
I don't know what the problem is there.
Yeah, I have more to say about that album because it was really good, and especially because I have it on a physical SACD, and those sound so good. I just love them so much.
Anyway, you can find the links all there. And if you don't see the full description or the list or the links don't show up clearly or aren't active on wherever you listen to us, app or platform, just come over to our host site. That's Podbean, Podbean, and everything's easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe or follow. Tell a friend who likes music. That'll help us grow our audience. And take a minute, give us a review or a ranking. We haven't got a review or a ranking in a while now. If you're listening, especially on Apple Podcasts, just take a minute, hit those stars, put in a little note. That really helps us out in the recommendations, helps us cut through all the K-pop podcasts that flood the recommendations. There's very few jazz and classical things in there. You can also come over. We've got a Facebook page. I put up a bunch of new jazz releases this week. A lot of good stuff came out. If you want to find out what's coming out new every day, I'm up by 5 at the latest with my coffee, scouting the new releases.
Wow.
Whatever I find the best of for that day, I share it right away there. So if you want to save yourself time and find good music, if you think you agree with my tastes, then you can find what I find right away there. You can also leave a message or comment there and see some interaction that we have with some of the musicians. And this week we got a lot of great feedback from John Ilabuni on his
thanks,
album
John.
that we did last week. And
we loved that record, though. Yeah,
he shared the episode. Actually, we heard back from all of the jazz artists.
Yeah,
they're usually quite
we
gracious.
Almost never hear from the classical artists. They do write back sometimes, though.
Yeah,
but
once in a while. Like, even the composer, what was it? Nimrod
Borenstein wrote to us. Yeah, I think he's got a new album out, too. I'll have to kind of give him a little special preference there. We'll have to see if maybe we'll check that out.
Kind of more... networks you have to go through to get to the classical musicians. But jazz operates more on ground level,
Especially the jazz artists that we're featuring. I think if we were to go for some of the big names, we probably wouldn't hear from them.
But anyway, John was kind enough to share our review, and we really love that album. If you haven't heard it, you should, You Are Not Alone. Go back and check that out.
It's special. It's not just good, it's special, so I think people should hear that.
It's an album that takes you places, so you should go on that little journey and check that out.
Especially since we can't get out of here because it's too expensive.
Yeah, right.
This is the only way we could travel this summer.
Yeah,
between high airline prices and the weak yen we have here in Japan, we're grounded.
So check that out. Come over and see us on Facebook, or if you'd like to write to us by email, any comments, questions, suggestions. We'll be happy to read your message and reply to you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. Now, this week we do not have any official Dies Irae theme for
we do have some deaths,
departed, but we have a couple that we should mention that will probably ring some bells in listeners' minds. And the first one you brought to my attention because it brought me back to all that kind of new agey and fusiony stuff from the 80s.
Oh, you're going to mention this guy first. Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
George Winston, the Windham Hill pianist who I remember so well from the 1980s, because most of the girls I dated had a Windham Hill record in their dorm rooms.
Oh.
It was okay. I mean, given the situation I was listening to it in, I rather enjoyed it. But he was a little too... casual for me, I think. Anyway, but George Winston, who was very popular in the 1980s on the Windham Hill label, that was the time when New Age was really kind of soft and kind of wallpapery sounding. It's kind of changed now. It's got a little more kind of content to it now. But he would just kind of doodle on the piano, and that would be a record. But he was
it's a big name.
He was a big name, and he was part of our youth, let's say. Right. So and I have a lot of happy memories of.
I bet you do.
The situations I was in when I was hearing his music. So there you go.
All right.
Rest in peace, George Winston.
George Winston. And of course, probably everyone has heard this now, but we lost the vocalist Astrid Gilberto this week. And although she's not really a jazz musician or part of that, but her wispy and untrained voice graced that wonderful recording with her husband and Stan Getz, and brought us The Girl from Ipanema, Corcovado. And, without that vocal element, maybe Bossa Nova wouldn't have spread as wide as it did in the 60s.
That one record really started that all out, didn't it? We should mention what it is just in case, because there are people that
might not know.
They did not know, The Getz Gilberto album, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's called.
Right.
And it's got The Girl from Ipanema on it.
Corcovado, a great version of that on there too.
It's an easy listen. It's really
easy, wonderful listen. I still listen to it once in a while.
Yeah, me
Everybody
too.
likes
I've
it.
got it too. Yeah,
and it brought on that whole craze of bossa nova in jazz, which before Brazilian in the 40s, even with Dizzy Gillespie, the Afro-Cuban rhythms had come in and become part of jazz. But this new Brazilian craze of music, bossa nova, somehow it just fit, especially like the lyrical phrasing of Stan Getz, and it brought you to this relaxed kind of mood. And, now it's permanently a part of jazz. You often hear a bossa tune on any new jazz recording. But her voice, having a vocal element catches other people in the regular public's attention too. So yeah, everyone knew this song at the time and for decades later. And it's sad to see an iconic voice like that go out. She was 83 years old. Right. So we can thank her for part of the popularity of that bossa sound. So rest in peace, Astrid Gilberto.
Must have been kind of a fun life too, having that behind you, that kind of a career,
Oh, before we jump into this week's musical selections, we also want to give a shout out and recommendation to our friends over at the Same Difference podcast. That's Same Difference, two jazz fans, one jazz standard, set up every other week by Johnny Valenzuela and Tony Habra. They focus on jazz standards, as the title indicates, looking at several versions each episode of famous standard, and they play little snippets from each one, talk about the history and what they like and don't like, and generally in a good mood and fun podcast to listen to. Kind of complements what we do. They focus on the old stuff, and we focus on the new releases. This week we're going to hear a lot of standards done in a really unique way. So I'd be interested to see what they thought of some of these versions here, but we'll get to that later once we get into the jazz program.
I think that's going to be way at the end of this. You have to go ahead an hour and a half to
if you make it out there.
But to hear that one.
Anyway, check the episode description. You'll find a link to their podcast, and you'll also hear their promo if you stick around to the end of the audio of our podcast. So do check those guys out.
Yeah, I like them myself. Okay, so earlier we were talking about the this album, Seicento Stravagante.
Yeah.
Music for cornetto and keyboard. Now, let me just mention the artist. This is David Brutti on the cornetto and Nicola Lamon on the organ and harpsichord. Okay, now... And this is a bis SACD. Okay, it's an SACD if you're buying the physical copy. Don't worry, it will play on your CD player if you don't have an SACD player. But boy, these kind of recordings, because they have organ on them, they sound so good as an SACD. It's such a rich sound. I love this guy's name, David Brutti. Italian names are fantastic, because Brutti, it's the plural for ugly.
Yeah.
So, and I love the way they'll just if his name was in English, he'd be like David Ugly. They just the Ugly family or something like that. They just keep these names.
Isn't that what the Italians called Charles Bronson? Not the plural, but
Bronson?
Yeah, I think that was his nickname in the Italian cinema.
Is it Brutto or something? I don't know.
Brutte or something like that. Yeah.
Could be. Anyway, his cornet playing certainly isn't Brutto. It's really good. No. In fact, it's very impressive. He plays quite a few instruments on this album. I should mention this because when I first saw this album, I thought, cornetto, it's going to be like a cornet, like the brass instrument. But no, it's because, Baroque.
No, this is the wooden one, yeah.
But this is like the wooden. It's not a cornet. It's a cornet with two T's in English. It's not just one T.
Right.
But in Italian, cornetto. And I'll be calling it the cornetto, sticking with the Italian name throughout just to distinguish it from I don't want anybody to be confused with the cornet, which is kind of like a trumpet sort of. Okay. So it's an early Renaissance / Baroque wind instrument, not brass, it's wind. And it comes in a curved and straight versions. And there's also a mute version too. And we hear three of them on the recording, all three of these. And these instruments were made in 2018 to 2019. So they were newly made versions, instruments. Yeah. We're also going to hear two organs and a harpsichord. And I'll talk about them as they come up. Now, the booklet notes on this CD, if you decide to buy it, or on this SACD, which I recommend you do if you like this kind of music. Now, I have to say, when I see a title like Seicento Stravagante, it's like going to be Baroque Italian. I'm just all over that. I love this period so much. It just kind of, I don't know, it does something for me. It was like the dawn of a new era in music. Baroque music really started in Italy in around 1600. And it started with the whole desire to figure out what ancient Greek theater was like. And they figured, in order to have like a play in an open air theater like that, you would have had to chant the words so that they would carry. So this whole new idea of singing started in Italy, and the Brocchieri gives the first opera and the first great opera, which is Orfeo by Monteverdi. There were others before that. And opera became what it became today eventually over the years. It became this huge form of entertainment before movies. It was like the grandest form of entertainment you can have up until the 20th century. The booklet notes talk about the instrumentalized vocal styles that we hear on this album and the more instrumentally conceived works that replace them later. And I could go into all this, but I decided to just let you read Charles Brewer's notes, because otherwise we'd be here forever, because they're highly detailed. There's a lot to know about these works if you want to know them, or you could just kick back and listen to them. They're a pretty easy listening and a very interesting one as well, because as Russ mentioned to me before the podcast started, you always have these great dissonant, like passing notes in the melodies and harmony and stuff, and they they suddenly jar you, and I just love that. There are these sudden rhythmic changes for new sections without any setup. It's just really wonderful.
Right near the beginning on the second track, there's these like upward swoops.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? It's pretty interesting. And, I was a trumpet player, and so the cornetti as a instrument that you play with an embouchure, but that it's made of wood. There's nothing in existence today like this. So it's a sound from a different time and a different place.
Right.
It's really unusual that you're not going to hear in any other music other than this sort of revival of this kind of period with new instruments. And so that makes it really unique. And reading on the history of this, I came across a passage that said for a time, trumpets were banned in Germany. You weren't allowed to play them. I don't know why probably my parents wished they were when I was practicing when I was young. But apparently, the wooden instrument.
Your parents are apparently of German descent.
Yeah. No, they weren't. But anyway, this instrument has a much softer overall kind of output and tone. And I guess they're actually the wood was wrapped with leather. In some of them, so it's really fascinating because there's nothing like this, that continued on. And so they had to investigate how these instruments were made and then, reproduce them. And you play it actually out of the corner of your mouth with a different kind of embouchure than the trumpet. So it's just kind of a fascinating thing with a very unique tone that's, I find, kind of enchanting.
Which kind of leads you to wonder, how do you even learn this? Like, somebody would have had to relearn this entire technique from books.
I guess
because there would be nobody to teach it to you. Yeah. And then you'd hand it on to students, I would guess. It would be nice to talk to David Brutti about this, actually, because he's a really excellent player. He gets a great tone. I would recommend that listeners check out YouTube for some of this. Not just for the cornetto, but there's also an instrument on this. What is it? Oh, I wrote it down somewhere, but it's buried in my text here. All right, when it comes up, I'll find it. I can't remember. But there's a keyboard instrument, like the lighter one. It was in the middle track. I can find it here. I didn't know what it was, and I looked on YouTube, and what an odd looking instrument this thing is. It's a Regal. Oh. Okay. On track 8, we'll get to that when we talk about it. And it's an odd instrument. It's got bellows behind the keyboard, and you work the bellows via pedals with your feet.
Oh, wow.
It's just bizarre. And it makes an odd nasally sound, too. I can see why it went out of favor. Yeah. But, at the time, when you wanted sustain and you didn't have like a huge church organ available, I guess you would have used one of these things.
Just pump it up, yeah.
Right. All right, let's go through the tracks before we, because there's a lot to talk about on these anyway. Also, we have all these wonderful unknown Italian composers with fantastic names, like the first one, Giovanni Battista Fontana.
Oh, yeah.
Giovanni Battista means John the Baptist, so a lot of people at the time were named after John the Baptist, right? Let's see, Sonata Terza, okay. Now, on this one, we're hearing, if you want to follow along and get the tone of what all these instruments are, we're hearing the straight cornetto on this one. And this one has kind of a low recorder type sound, but it's rougher in the edges in attack. It's actually a lot harsher than a recorder. Actually is has a nice smooth sound. This really doesn't have that. But the piece has a lovely melody with a springy rhythm. Actually, all of these really do, and is accompanied here by the harpsichord. Now, the overall sound is rather quiet, with the cornetto sticking out a bit at times. And I really liked on this album the realistic harpsichord sound in terms of its volume, it kind of sounds like a harpsichord that you would hear live if you were in a... This is interesting because you really can't turn it up. Otherwise, the sound of the cornetto will blow you away. It's because it's recorded very accurately. So the harpsichord really sounds not faint, but it's very, very quiet. And this is a good reproduction of the sound of that you would hear if you were in a concert hall listening to the harpsichord. It's very clearly audible, but very quiet. The cornetto is placed far to the left on the recording. I would have liked it more in the center. And I'm listening to this in 5-channel stereo, too, and it's still using the left side of the... I didn't check the back speakers. Those are usually ambient, but he's like standing on the side of the stage, and I guess they had the harpsichord would be more on the right, but the harpsichord seemed to take up more of the space. The piece goes into some variations of the theme. This is the technique that'll be used in all of these before composers figured out all of these, how to get around the harmonic wheel of... circle of fifths. They used to do things like this. There's sudden changes of rhythm and style, and we're accustomed to instrumental music of this period, and the playing is very lively and very present throughout the album. Track 2, just bathe in these names. Girolamo Frescobaldi, Canzon Terza della La Lucchesina. This is, again, the straight cornetto, and this track features the main organ used on the album. It was built by Paolo Cipri circa 1578 and is located at Monte San Giovanni in Bologna in Italy. Now, this has been reconstructed in recent years. I think I can't remember the 70s or no, it was later than that. Let me check here. It was built in circa 1578 and restored by Paolo Tolari in 1991, okay? But it still retains its kind of old sound. One of the wonderful things about these organs, and this is especially true in Italy, like I've been to Paris, and you can hear a lot of in France, and you can hear a lot of organ concerts in the big churches, and they all have these. It's not quite an American organ, but they have these big, powerful sounds. They're more like the Romantic era or the Classical era, but the very old Italian organs, they all have their own personality. They're not as big sounding, but they have this really kind of worn in kind of quality to the sound, and they're all very individual. They're almost like people, you kind of listen to one and then another, and you kind of want to hear them all once you hear one. Anyway, it's slightly piercing at the level of power here, but quickly becomes lyrical in this piece. And the organ, of course, is capable of many timbral changes, and the organist here uses several appealing ones, setting the tone of the cornetto off in a variety of ways. Now, this is really interesting. You're hearing the cornetto, which the sound doesn't really change once he starts playing it, but the organ sound changes a lot. So it's almost like you've got this character against like these different backgrounds, and the whole way that it's set off, like sometimes it blends in more and sometimes the cornetto will stand out more. It's really a wonderful thing for the ears, and I think you will really enjoy this album for that reason, especially on these organ tracks. The cornetto here, and this may be because of the organ, it actually sounds brassy at points. Like, listen at the 2-minute and 10-second mark. This is track 2. At 2:55, there's a variation with echoes from the cornetto. An echo means when you play a melody and then you repeat it quietly, like it's coming from far away, like an echo. And he does this effect here.
This one has some pretty cool modality changes, too. It's in major, then it's in minor. And it's
right,
back,
that happens a lot in these pieces, But they don't get away from the key like very far, you know what I mean? That's the thing, that hadn't been figured out yet. That's going to come, Vivaldi, Handel, and finally Bach, who's going to really set the whole thing up for the classical era. The organ occasionally participates in this echo game, too. It's really a fun piece. The third track, Annibale Padovano, Toccata del Sesto Tono.
Is that a kind of cheese?
I think Padovano might be. I don't know. But I think you're thinking of Parmigiano.
Or Pavano, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. And Annibale is named after Hannibal, of course, the invader of Italy during Roman times from Persia. He came over the Alps with an army of riding elephants, which the Romans had never seen before. But the Romans managed to somehow repel him despite all that. Anyway, that has nothing to do with this piece. We hear the straight cornetto again. It's long sustained, loud, full-voiced chord from the organ at the beginning. This is a solo work and comes across as solemn. I love organ recordings and surround sound. Oh, I'm sorry. There's no straight cornetto in this. It's just the organ. Okay. I love organ recordings in surround sound. The quality is clear and close, so we don't get the large church ambience we often get on solo organ recordings. That's because it's not as loud an organ, although on the recording, it's very present. Okay. It's just not as powerful as, like, say, an American organ would be, which I really think are designed for their destructive capacity to weaken the foundation of the building they're in. But this organ sounds rather small. The recording gives it an intimate feel, and you get a real sense of the organ's sound and power. It's a powerful piece. We're always hearing the organ from Bologna, unless I mention differently. On 2 tracks, there's a different organ. Next, Dario Castello. This is a composer that I really like. I've liked all the music I've heard from him. Sonata Prima. And here we're hearing the curved cornetto for the first time on this track. So I guess we had that organ track, and now we're changing the cornetto instrument. So we have a different sound. Oh, the organ's different on this track, too. This is the one that's built in Venice by an anonymous maker around the year 1660. It's located in the hamlet of Caprile in Belluno, Italy, a place I've never been, so I don't even know where this is. But it's a tiny place. Here the organ sound is breathier, and the cornetto plays with it in a fuller tone. I really enjoyed the character the instrument adds to this music. This piece is an example of the Stilus Fantasticus. We heard a whole album of these kind of works, like I think last year, which is an instrumental style of music with a lot of quick rhythmic changes and sections. The cornetto steps out a bit in his solo in this piece, getting more adventurous, pushing his tone to occasionally harsher and more piercing sounds. This is a sound we need to get used to if we're listening to Renaissance-era music like shawms and sackbuts. This instrument is a little removed from that, but is capable of kind of like that harsh nasal sound. Yeah. The piece ends rather suddenly and unexpectedly, and then we go on to track 5, Andrea Gabrielli, who was famous for... I think he worked in Venice with his brother Giovanni. They worked at St. Mark's. Anyway, Canzone Francese detto Qui la dira. This is a harpsichord solo, and we get the distant harpsichord. Now, at this point, the volume might be driving you crazy, but this is actually the sound the harpsichord would make. It's still quiet here, even though it's a solo. They haven't moved it up. And that's good. Maybe we should have had, like, one section of all harpsichord and one section of organ. I don't know, but it's kind of odd as far as the volume of the recording goes, because you might be tempted to turn it up, but that would be a mistake. Anyway, the harpsichord is at its concert volume, and I want to nod to the engineer here, credited as Studio Seicento. They don't give a name of a person, so for giving it this much realistic distance and clarity. This piece is contemplative and spacious at a slow tempo. Track 6, Girolamo Kapsberger, a composer who I really like as well. Sinfonia 13. I'll just say it in English. According to the booklet, both straight and mute cornetti are heard on this track. It starts with the harpsichord, with some immediately appealing chords. The cornetto plays the poignant theme. It then goes into a faster variation, and I'm guessing this is going to be the other cornetto in the faster variation, dancing in triplet rhythm. It's a brief piece at 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Track 7, Andrea Falconieri, La Monarca, has the curved cornetto. It's fuller toned on this track, accompanied again by the harpsichord. At 1:39, a chromatic theme starts, slowing the piece down and making it heavy. There's something funny about chromaticism, how it does that. It really weighs things down. It's like we were hearing like water flow, and suddenly it's like molasses. It's just kind of slowly coming out. This minor key suits the cornetto well. It communicates great poignancy. Track 8, Riccardo Rognoni, Un Gai Berger, which I guess is Old French. This is the straight cornetto. We're back to that. The keyboard instrument is a regal on this piece, and I mentioned that, which produces an odd, very light, nasal, sustained tone, imitating the more nasal cornetto in this work. It's a portable organ that has brass reeds held in resonators and 2 bellows, which are moved with pedals. And you can see pictures of it on the internet, and you can see someone actually playing it on YouTube if you just type it in. The Regal, R-E-G-A-L, right? Regal organ. Okay, that'll help. The ear is constantly on that instrument since it's a new sound on the recording. And the entire track is nasal in tone, a sound very reminiscent of like Renaissance, like groups like sackbuts and cornets and that kind of thing. Track 9, okay, Angelo Notari, Ai che s'accresce in me. This is a straight cornetto. The harpsichord starts this with gentle single notes, and the cornetto comes in melodically with a softer attack. There's a great dissonance at around the 48-second mark, leading to a cadence. This is one of the things that Russ and I really love about music from this era, when there's a passing tone, it's just this really dissonant note. That's at 48 seconds if you want to hear it, and track 9. The piece is plain spoken and touching in its melody and unostentatious resolutions. Track 10 is an anonymously composed piece, Canzone su Partimento, and this is an organ solo. We're hearing the Venetian organ, the Venetian-made organ, here again, this is the one in Belluno, in softer voice. Sounding present and solid, well caught on the recording, and I love its sound. It's got its own particular character and doesn't sound like a generic organ at all. The piece is rather short at 1 minute 46 seconds and engages in a song-like melody with chordal accompaniment. Track 11, Girolamo Dalla Casa, a piece called Suzanne un jour, which was a very popular piece in the Renaissance. This is the curved cornetto. It's actually a song, I think. The cornetto starts this one, and the organ comes in with its lower keyboard range. Now we're back to the one in Bologna. This is the Bologna organ, which I think is kind of a bigger sounding one, blending well with the soloist so that you almost don't realize it's an organ. The organ plays chords throughout in a solemn tone as the cornetto embellishes the melody with figuration, varying his approach each time the melody comes around. Track 12, Giovanni Salvatore, Toccata Seconda del Nono Tono. This is an organ solo on the Bologna organ. The rest will be on the Bologna organ, in fact. This has an appealing full sound. The piece starts with full sustained harmony on the chords and figuration in the melodic area. There are lots of ornaments, and I love the full range of sound the instrument and recording produce here. The piece has full spectrum sustained chords throughout, acting as accompaniment to the melodic material. It lets up a bit when the lower voices join in with the melodic activity at around the 2 minute and 10-second mark, where the thematic material is passed from voice to voice. Track 13, Giovanni Martino Cesare, La Focarina. This has the straight cornetto and starts with a softer attack on the organ. The cornetto's line is melodic and features a lot of ornamentation. You can say that about all of these tracks, I guess. The cornetto actually has brassy qualities in this piece and shows a bit of virtuosity in some of the ornamentation. Track 14, Francesco Rognoni Taeggio, Pulcra es amica mea. This has the mute cornetto, which we're really hearing for the first time, all by throughout the piece here. We've heard it once before, but only as a part of the piece. This starts with the organ again, and we hear the mellower toned mute cornetto play the downcast minor melody. The melody is beautifully shaped by Brutti to the point that it's touching in certain spots. He gets maximum motion out of the still rather brash-sounding instrument. Track 15, Giovanni Battista Fontana, Sonata Seconda. Here, Brutti is playing the curved cornetto. This has the powerful, brassy-sounding curved cornetto. We hear the organ again, the Bologna one. The organ accompaniment mostly features block chords with occasional decoration in the first section, with the cornetto taking the melody. Brutti is able to shade the tone of this instrument well so that it's never got an in-your-face sound, as I think it probably would in the hands of a lot of people. He kind of tempers it a bit, you know?
I bet I could play some real evil sounds on this if I got my hands on one.
I think you probably could, indeed. You wouldn't want to get it in the hands of a kid. The organ starts imitating some of the cornetto's lines in the second section. I like the somber tone Brutti is able to get on the cornetto in the section in the third minute. At 3:44, a triplet dancing melody starts up, very common in music of this era. The cornetto plays winding lines. The next section slows down, and the organ gets a church-like vibe as the cornetto ripples through its material. The last section has a bit of a lift to it, and we hear imitation between the organ and cornetto. Finally, we end with a piece by Biagio Marini, Sonata per organo e violino o cornetto. So violin or cornetto. And of course, we're going to hear the cornetto, not the violin. This one, he uses the curved cornetto. We hear this is the Venetian-made organ again. That's in Belluno, Italy, for the second and final time, which sounds a bit more modern than the Bologna-based one. It introduces the theme, which the cornetto then repeats. We hear a lot of those Monteverdian runs that he likes to use on trumpets. Think of the Vespers, if you know the opening track of the Monteverdi Vespers. You hear those great brass fanfares. The organ has a lot of solo material in this piece, after which the cornetto will come in repeating it, then going off on its own tangent. At 132, there's a nice change of sound in the organ to a lower end sound. Then the next section, the organ leaps up high in its mid-range as the cornetto imitates its lines. There's a really harsh but perfectly musical outburst from the cornetto at the 3-minute mark or so after the organ's solo section, and this leads to a cadence of the organ to end the piece. Yeah, those kind of brash outbursts, that could have easily been the whole album in certain players' hands. Okay, let me just say, listeners, I'm biased about this album right from the beginning. I love early Italian Baroque music of all sorts, as well as late Italian Renaissance music, and this really hit the spot for me. It's extremely well played. I made fun of David Brutti's name at the beginning, but he's a great player, and he should really be praised for his ability on this album. He'd be a great person to talk to, too, about this instrument. The character of the works is perfectly realized, as we would expect from two Italian musicians steeped in the tradition of the period. In fact, I'd say that David Brutti's playing of the various cornetti is amazing. The instruments have the character of brash, blaring instruments from the Renaissance era, and Brutti keeps all of his instruments sounding tuneful and tonally under control. I appreciated Bies's realistic sound on the harpsichord and the way the recording captured the organ used. In fact, the sound of the organ on most of the tracks, the Paolo Cipri, built in the Monte San Giovanni, Bologna, Italy, has real character, as does the other used on only 2 tracks located in Caprile in Belluno, Italy, which is in the Veneto, not far from Venice, actually. Both organs are restored, but have such fantastic character and individuality that I was mesmerized each time I heard them. The whole album is a unique approach to music that's becoming more available, but that I feel still isn't familiar enough. And if you like this era of music, I'd say you have to hear this. I'd encourage everyone else to sample it at least. The music is expertly played. All of the instruments have their own unique character and timbre, not least the organs. And I will be returning to this, absolutely.
Even though I've heard Cornetto before, and we've had a few recordings with them on the podcast, it's still an unusually charming sound that comes from a different time and place and always makes me tune into it.
Yeah, it definitely grabs the attention.
Yes. Everything here is played with enthusiastic spirit and a real kind of sprightly energy. There's a lot of snap to the lines, and it makes it a lot of fun.
That sprung Italian rhythm.
Yeah.
That comes with the sunshine of that fantastic country.
And I enjoyed the melodies a lot. They're easy to follow and pleasing. And the unexpected harmonic changes and interesting cadences that sort of, we're used to, we always say this on the podcast, but we got used to, the codification in Baroque with Bach, and then how everything is sort of neatly smoothed out in the late Baroque into classical. Here, there's still lots of unexpected turns and strange resolutions, changing modalities, and it really catches your attention there. And as Mike mentioned, I noticed that the loudness varies a lot between tracks because of the natural volume differences in the harpsichord and the organs, and that's not a bad thing. I'm glad that they didn't kind of manipulate the levels to sort of get a normalized sound. Here, I would just suggest, to get maximum enjoyment out of this recording, give yourself a quiet place where you can listen to everything on a straight through listen, and you may have to adjust the volume a little bit, but you're going to get the actual realistic volume of the harpsichord in a performance, which often sounds unusually large when they record it in modern recordings. But this is a really natural type of sound and gets an idealized balance between the instruments, I think. So a lot of fun, enjoyable music and great performances.
Yeah, the cornetto stays at the same volume pretty much throughout, so you can adjust the volume according to that instrument where it sounds comfortable. Right. And then if the organ comes in really loud or the harpsichord comes in really quietly, just leave it. That's the way it's supposed to sound, I would say. Anyway, off to the second recording, Rachmaninoff, the 150th anniversary of his birth, I believe, this year. So this is our second Rachmaninoff album, because we heard the Vespers earlier in the year at around Easter. This is Rachmaninoff's Symphony No. 2, and then it also has his Prelude in C-sharp minor orchestrated by Leopold Stokowski. Stokowski, by the way, was a really famous conductor who very famously conducted without a baton. He just used his fists and his hands. And Boulez did that too. Pierre Boulez never used to use a baton either. But Stokowski many people will know him. He's the first conductor I think I ever saw because I never actually saw him though, because he was the conductor in Disney's Fantasia. So and you hear his voice in that movie, and you see his profile, and he shakes hands with Mickey Mouse at one point. Oh, by the way, in all those old Bugs Bunny cartoons, when Bugs Bunny comes out and all the Leopold, that's him. Yeah, it's supposed to be Stokowski. That's who they're referring to.
Yes,
with the bass singer, right? Yeah, he's holding this note for a long time, and all his buttons on his tuxedo were popping off. Yep. It was a great cartoon. Check that out. Okay, this is played by the Sinfonia of London and John Wilson, an ensemble who have just wowed me many, many times. So I wanted to hear this. And this is a Chandos, and it's also an SACD, and that helps a lot. Okay, now, let me just lay my cards on the table here. The Symphony No. 2 by Rachmaninoff is a piece I've never really taken to. And I wanted to hear, because I think it's big, kind of like a Mahler symphony, but it's not quite that long. It comes out to about 50 minutes long. And it's very, very sweet sounding in the strings. And I think, for me, I've got to get myself out of this. This has to do with the time I was born, because when I was younger, you used to have records of like Mantovani string orchestra, and there was like this really sickeningly sweet strings, and it was a big sound at the time in the 60s, but it all comes from Rachmaninoff. And I really need to start hearing him as the originator of that sound, because it's just that it was overdone later. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think, even in Rachmaninoff's piano works, it's really why I enjoy Daniel Trifonov's playing so much, because it has to be played in the right way, without the extra kind of sentimentality added to it. There could be lots of sentimentality. But if it's done right, just like this work, it can be exhilarating and really moving. Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't really get exhilarated by this, but it's a pretty fantastic performance and recording, I could say, right at the beginning. The first thing we hear is the famous Prelude in C sharp minor. This is a piano prelude written in 1892, and this is orchestrated by Stokowski. Now, Stokowski, if you remember Fantasia, the first piece you hear in that movie is Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, orchestrated for the orchestra by Stokowski. And what he does is he likes to have like different sections of the orchestra play the theme, and it kind of goes from there. And he relies a lot on the strings. And he does something similar here. The monstrous opening tones of the piano, because it's really satisfying to play this on the piano, because there are just these bass octaves that you just have to play. He writes like 5 Fs in the score, I seem to recall. And it's just thunder, it's this kind of thunder that at the time only Russian pianists could produce, because they had come up with this new technique for projecting the sound from the piano. And later on, like other pianists learned that, but they really had Russians really had the that technique, kind of like they had all these ballet secrets too, like that no one else could do at the time, these huge leaps that they could do. And no, they were really something else in the early 20th century. Anyway, those monstrous opening tones on the piano are really blown up by Stokowski here, with glowering brass and a timpani roll too. The theme is rendered in ghostly tremolos in the strings. This is really surprising, really, that he would do that. Because if you think it's on the piano, it would just be this solid piano sound. It's a feature of Stokowski's arrangement all the way to the end. I mean, you hear this tremolo all the way through when the strings play. Brass play the bass parts, and sound quality, as has been the case with Chandos' DSD recordings of Symphonia of London and John Wilson in the past, is spacious, dynamic, and glorious overall in its clarity and impact. It puts across the massive climaxes while sensitively capturing the pianissimi. We get the full range here. When you set your volume, you can easily set your volume for the whole recording via this piece right from the beginning. Whatever sounds good on that thunderous opening. I don't think it gets louder than that, but there are going to be some really beautiful pianissimi coming up. Okay, the rest of the album is dedicated to the Symphony No. 2 in E minor, Opus 27, written in 1906 to 1907. We need to think about these days now. Rachmaninoff is still in Russia at this time, and this is before the Russian Revolution, when it became the Soviet Union in the I don't remember the exact year. Geez, it's in the 1910s, though. Anyway, this is before that. And the work draws on the full arsenal of Rachmaninoff's technique. It synthesizes Russian symphonic trends as represented by Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, and his teacher, Sergei Taneyev, whose music is now being recorded. And we need to really hear more of it because he was another great composer, Taneyev. We don't hear enough of him. And it combines these with the glamour of the Lisztian symphonic poem, and I hear a lot of that too. I actually think of the Lisztian symphonic poems. I like them, but they can get indulgent, and I kind of feel like this symphony can too, although it's very well structured despite its large size. Anyway, speaking of large size, the first movement, Largo, is 21 minutes long. Now, that's not really that long. There are other romantic works that have first movements this long. I think of the Brahms Piano Concerti, but they seem short because they're just so great. Anyway, this is okay. The cello and basses play the opening conjunct theme. Conjunct meaning that there are no leaps in the melody. It's very close, the notes. With brass chords coming in afterwards. The strings play that sweet melody. There it is, right there. It's all nougaty and stretchy, and it's giving me cavities. just by listening to it. The opening's ponderous and slow. It really feels like a long, long build-up. And all sounds are beautifully caught on the recording. The strings carry a great deal of the melodic material, and Rachmaninoff and John Wilson, the conductor, get an exceptionally sweet sound from them, which is characteristic of the work. We need to keep in mind when we hear this again, this is Rachmaninoff's sound, and it's a sound he loved. It got overused later, so when we hear it, we say, oh, it's so saccharine sounding. But no, it was kind of like how he heard it, and he was really the first to do this. And this would have wowed audiences at the time. And you know it did, because it lasted another 40 years. Anyway, There's also some very present brass used for harmony and punctuation. The work takes its time building up tension, and Wilson is in no hurry, keeping the rhythm taut while allowing the themes to be exposed at a leisurely tempo. Now, what's important here is he's going at this comfortable tempo, but the rhythm doesn't sag ever, and that's what really keeps tension building. So this is a really well-conducted performance, as I sort of expected it would be. At around 4:45, we hear a precisely marked rhythm for the first time with string melody. Now, when I say precisely marked, I mean you can kind of feel the downbeat. You don't have to count it anymore. There's a Russian feel to this part rather than the Lisztian sound bath of the opening. And climaxes register strongly on the recording. There's a strong accent just after the 6th minute. At 6:25, winds and strings share a question and response section of music. Despite the length of the movement, motives and thematic material in general is all tied into a unit exceptionally well so that they all register well on repeat. You remember them when you hear them, and that has a lot to do with the conducting as well. One example would be the Russian theme heard again after the 8-minute mark. It sounds sort of like a Russian folk dance. There's a pretty Tchaikovsky melody just after the 10-minute mark. When I heard this, I thought, Tchaikovsky. That winds introduce and strings finish. Now, this isn't a pastiche, but Rachmaninoff is sort of using their styles to kind of sum up sort of Russian music up to the time when he's writing this. Sections of music melt into each other appealingly throughout the work, an effect well portrayed by Wilson and the Sinfonia of London. By the 14th minute, we've melted into a more menacing section that climbs and builds tension as it does so. This continues for some time, Rachmaninoff going to Mahlerian lengths, Gustav Mahler, and proportions to build up his material. It resolves slowly. There's a slow build to the final cadence, with the crescendo peaking at a fairly modest forte. The second movement, marked allegro molto, not a slow movement. This really does sound kind of like a Mahler sort of structure to me. And it's very romantic, as was Mahler's movement. I think actually Mahler had more modernist elements in his music, though, than Rachmaninoff did. Rushing strings open the movement very much in the Russian troika ride tradition. If you remember Prokofiev's piece from Lieutenant Kije, it's that sort of rhythm for the troika ride. The conducting has good energy and rhythmic propulsion is well realized. At 1:08, a more romantic theme is heard in the strings. And when I say romantic, Rachmaninoff is the king of romance, as we all know from the end of the last movement of the second piano concerto. This sounds like that. It's very syrupy. Let's see. After this slow section, the more frenzied opening material comes back with even more energy at 2 minutes and 19 seconds. Now, I want to say, I'm saying that it's very syrupy and things, but Wilson doesn't make it sound schmaltzy, and that could easily happen. So he's keeping the rhythms taut, keeping the music moving, and not lingering on this in this kind of sickening way that some conductors of the past have done, who will remain nameless. This fades into a decrescendo, and we get frenzied, bowed music at around the 3-minute and 8-second mark. Wilson keeps all the rhythms taut. I keep saying this, even when the beats become more spread out. I like the sound of the famous brass chords at 4:23, creamy and sounding like they're coming from a distance. There's an awesome fortissimo at 5:13 as the music regains energy. The percussion impacts powerfully on the recording. At 5:54, gentle chiming percussion entered the score, giving the music a wintry feel. A more syrupy string theme returns at 6:30. Just before the end, we hear a beautiful brass chorale. The sound is full-bodied and rich. The scurrying strings bring the movement to a quiet end. I'm looking at all my writing here, and I've written the word taught, T-A-U-T, as taught, like he taught a lesson. I'm wondering if that's spell check doing that. I don't know. I have this thing where I like words that are different from each other. You know, they're spelled differently, but they're pronounced the same. And ever since college, we would always kind of write these words like the way they weren't supposed to be written. And now I think it's become a habit. I just write the word the opposite way. Okay, track 3, Adagio. We've heard so much syrupy string playing in this work, and now we're in the center of the beehive here as far as the honey goes. We have a movement dedicated specifically to that type of sound. This starts out with the strings, but the clarinet comes in with a main theme. And the booklet note mentions that the clarinet theme that we hear has apparently acted as the seed for a lot of popular songs, including Bob Crewe and Bob Gaudio's 1967 hit, Can't Take My Eyes Off You, originally released by Frankie Valli. You heard that contour in there?
I've heard that mentioned as one of the inspired pieces, yeah.
So I was listening to the melody. I'm like, okay, it's not the same melody, but I think the shape somehow is similar because there are certain contours of the melody that I kind of identified as, oh yeah, that could be that. I wouldn't have made the connection had I not read it in the notes, though, I have to say. Although the strings section of the melody at the 3-minute and 17-second mark does have a familiar contour from the song. So listen to that and see if you can hear it. The clarinet plays a big role in this movement and is back in the 4th minute in the spotlight. Strings take over again and build up tension in the 5th minute, playing fragments of the theme in the process. I think one of the things about this piece that bothers me is that that Rachmaninoff relies so heavily on the strings, and it's the 20th century. You want to hear more brass, more winds. But then again, he wants that sweet string sound, so that's why he does it. Tension gradually releases with a decrescendo, and we get a full ending to the section at 7:30. There's a pause, then a sweet solo violin melody takes the lead, passing the melody to various solo instruments. This section has a more personal feel as a result. The opening melody unwinds into the 14th and final minute at a leisurely, though always rhythmically taut, pace. The movement ends quietly. You gotta remember, too, I'm someone who grew up with distorted guitars. That was like the sound. And when you hear that sweet violin melody, that's like the opposite of a distorted guitar, you know? So I think I never really completely got over that. Okay, the 4th movement, Allegro Vivace, starts with lively material in the strings, and this is really the movement where he ties everything together. There's a second theme, then the first is heard again, always with the requisite sense of excitement in the playing. At 3:05, there's yet another romantic, syrupy string theme. This symphony is loaded with them. It's clearly a sound and melodic shape Rachmaninoff loved. Time is harmonically stretched out in this work, and this theme winds itself into the 6th minute, where it dissolves for 30 seconds into a cadence. Then at 6:41, the rhythm quickens, and we hear elements of the opening theme. By the 9th minute, the material is at full tilt with cymbal splashes and timpani hits adding accents. The music quickly decrescendos, bringing the harmony to a more mysterious place. The brass pick up the theme and sound chords with a satisfyingly burnished glow. Rushing strings return, and there's a prolonged buildup of tension, sometimes broken up, as at the 11-minute and 40-second mark, only to resume again. At 12:33, there's a gorgeous transition from a tension-building run to the romantic string theme, given extra glow by brass chords. Big-boned cadential material at the end, complete with timpani to give the ending a big impact and bring the audience to its feet. It almost brought me to mine. It was a big ending. Okay, so while I've never been a big fan of this particular symphony because he uses strings a lot and to exceptionally sweet effect, this is a sumptuously scored work, and it's brilliantly captured on the recording. John Wilson, as I expected, manages to keep all of the long-breathed melodies taut. Again, I've spelled it wrong. I did that. Okay, and in rhythmic proportion to each other, bringing out motivic relationships clearly. It's as good a recording as you'll ever hear of this work, and I think as good a performance as well. And it's done without cuts to the score, which sometimes occur. Rachmaninoff actually sanctioned them, but I'm a bit of a purist. I want to hear the whole score. Okay, even in opera, I want to hear all the spoken parts. The performance and recording are both a major wow, all climaxes registering fully in timing and power. So all that pacing that Wilson does really pays off when the climaxes arrive. You really do feel them. It's all just so beautifully timed and put together. It's really a recording you can't miss if you like the work. It makes me want to revisit it. I mean, this is another one I'll listen to again. I don't know when. I think I'm going to need some time just to hear the glorious sound of the recording and try to get some of those themes more deeply into my ear. You can hear the connections between motifs very clearly on this recording due to the pacing and the beautiful pacing that leads to those powerful climaxes. So, yeah, highly recommended here.
I'm a big fan of all of Rachmaninoff's orchestral works, this one included. So
I like the piano concertos, but that's because they have a piano in them, I think.
And I have a few different recordings of this. One I really like, I think it's by the Russian National Philharmonic, actually. And I have a couple other ones I don't like as much, but I really enjoyed this interpretation and the performance and the recording. There's detailed string textures. I like that sound. The low brass is really impressive.
Yeah.
I liked the kind of restrained phrasing on the sweeping sections of strings so it doesn't become too schmaltzy. As you said, that's your New York vocabulary word out there, schmaltz.
Schmaltz.
The explosive timpani hits are cool. I thought it was expressive without being indulgent.
That's important to make this work, this piece work. Yeah.
A warm sound quality through all the movements. The second movement has a really nice, intense sense of motion to it. I like the lightness of the sweeping theme, the furious and kind of fleet crescendos, and then more of that wide brass. So overall, I thought it was enthralling interpretation and performance that doesn't indulge too much, but I guess taut is a good word, and it gets all measured out and satisfyingly drawn to a conclusion, and you feel that everything was, perfectly in balance with it. And this recording just has great sonics. You can bathe in the sound there too. So I enjoyed it a lot.
I personally think this is probably the recording to have of this work, at least among certainly modern recordings. I've never heard of a better one, but I just, I guess I wouldn't have. I didn't hear all that many of them really. All right. Finally, our last classical album of the night is one that I thought was really special. I was really looking forward to this, and it paid off. The composer is Pierre Sancan. His year is 1916, died in 2008. Not all that long ago, really. It's Pierre Sancan, a musical tribute. This features one of our favorite pianists, Jean-Efflam Bavouzet, and Adam Walker on the flute for the famous flute sonatine. We'll get to that. And it's played by the BBC Philharmonic and Pascal Tortelier. This is on the Chandos label, Chandos, and it's not an SACD, which is kind of sad. I would have liked if it were. And I have to say, it's about time an album of Pierre Sancan's music came out. And it's even better that such heavy hitters are performing it on this album. Sancan was a composer who was born a little too late in a century of huge upheavals. He nevertheless accompanied a place at the heart of the history of French music in the second half of the 20th century as a composer, pianist, teacher, and an extremely endearing personality by all accounts. So he's kind of like the 20th century Haydn in that way, where everybody just liked him. It shows in his music, too, as it shows in Haydn's music. This is all really friendly music, just waiting to be discovered and loved, I think. You have to keep in mind, Sancan was born in 1916, the same year as Henri Dutilleux, who's a very different composer. I mean, he's very much in that 20th century sort of sound world,
I get a feeling, reading about him, he's very well known in France, but not so much outside.
Yeah.
And the overwhelming kind of theme, other than the string piece here, is that of playfulness and fun.
Yeah.
Which doesn't feature too much in 20th century
music.
Right? So he might have just been, too kind of enjoyable for some of the music that his contemporaries were doing.
Yeah, 20th century French composers, there are two real schools as far as I can see. There are the real modernists or post-war modernists like Pierre Boulez and the serialists and things like that. Henri Dutilleux would be like a post-war modernist. And then there are the really light composers like Jean-Michel Damas or Jean Francais. And I think Sancan isn't quite as light as those two.
He's playful and bombastic at the same time.
Yeah, and there's a bit of it's not played only for pleasure. There's a little bit more to the music than that. Okay, so I'll try to uncover that a little bit in what I say about these works. He was successful as a composer in his early days, but became a pianist because it was steadier work and paid the bills. That sounds like my life. Although I didn't become a pianist, I became something totally non-musical. Also, Bavouzet assumed he stopped composition because of the post-war avant-garde like Messiaen, Dutilleux, and Boulez, which confronted him with the limits of his development as a composer. He suffered from nerves, so he didn't want to play the piano live all the time, and later became a teacher at the Paris Conservatoire, and he devised a method. This is really interesting. This is what he's really most remembered for among musicians. He devised a method to help students cope with the growing demands placed on professional pianists. Of course, in the 20th century, some of the piano scores that were written were extremely demanding. Jean-Efflam Bavouzet was one of his students and credits him as changing his life by enabling him to transition from the state of being a gifted pianist to that of being a professional one. Wow. It's an interesting distinction. Okay, there's a good chance that most of us know one Sancan piece. His Sonatine for flute and piano is the only work of his regularly performed today, and it's on almost every flute and piano album, especially of French music. And if you have an album of French flute and piano music, there's a good chance this piece is on it.
It's so French and dreamy out of all of these,
It is included on this album, too. We hear Adam Walker play it with Jean-Efflam Bavouzet. But finally, we have much more besides, and in all different genres. The booklet notes, by the way, include appreciations by both Bavouzet and Tortelier, and a warmly written and well worth reading. They have little anecdotes about Sancan, what he was like, what he did, these sorts of things. The first track is called, appropriately enough, Ouverture Joyeuse, Joyous Overture. And what it is a joyous overture. It's not lying. It's right there. It's just over 5 minutes long, and it's in a rather light style. It's joyous in the way an Offenbach aria is joyful, in a champagne-like way. There are some harmonic and melodic surprises in the score. It's not quite straightforward. It's sort of a hybrid of the earlier Romantic era and the modernist one that Sancan was in at the time and just coming out of, really. The performance is full of enthusiastic energy, and the bass end, with its constant bass drum and cymbal crashes, registers well. There's some pretty orchestration after 216, with low whining reed instruments and sparkling light metal percussion. I can even detect a bit of Gershwinian jazziness in it at one point in the second minute. It's a pleasing curtain raiser, complete with a raucous ending and a clever final cadence after an unexpected pause. Next is the center point of this whole album, the Piano Concerto of 1955. It's certainly the longest work on the album. It's about a half an hour. It was written by Sancan for him to play himself. It includes a technique that Sancan was particularly known for, one of which was his repeated notes. And you're going to hear repeated notes all over the piano pieces on this, because it was one of Sancan's specialties as far as his technique when he liked to show it off. At just over 20 minutes, this is the major work of the album. It starts, the first movement, Modéré. It starts rather more seriously, certainly more seriously than the overture that we just heard, with brooding low strings. It's a long movement at 15 minutes. After the brooding opening, a crashing, lively theme is heard, then back to a string theme with some warmly gorgeous harmony. The expositions of themes takes its time, but they're all so beautifully orchestrated. There's a crescendo building up tension that isn't quite released, despite the chords of tension really being hammered on. The piano finally makes its entry at 2:39. That's 2.5 minutes into the piece with bold octaves. We hear some sparkling trills in the following quieter passage in the 3rd minute. The piano has some compelling harmonies in the 4th minute, sounding like he's picked up some post-war harmony here. There's a rushing theme that appears in the 5th minute in the strings and drives the movement for a while. And I should mention that the sound of the orchestra and piano is a bit distant on the recording. Crashing sonorities register well, and I'm guessing that's probably the reason for the distance. But on the piano's louder passages, one doesn't get a three-dimensional sense of the instrument. There's a pause in the... Okay, so the sound, I don't know, it's a little bit two-dimensional on the recording. And after the Rachmaninoff, I got to say, this is a little bit of a letdown by Chandos here, because that one was so vivid. Anyway, there's a pause in the 7th minute that actually sounds like the end of the movement, but the music resumes on dramatic romantic passages after that. A lot of tricks in this movement. At 8:38, the section after the pause comes to an end via a natural fade, and the piano gets a broken music box type of solo with some colorful extra notes thrown in. This develops over time into a crescendoing, tension-building passage in the orchestra with piano playing figures over it. At 11 minutes and 10 seconds, the crescendo bursts and the piano starts some racing figuration. The piano and orchestra now seem at odds with each other, but come into sync towards the end of the 11th minute as the piano answers the orchestra's gestures. At 12:30, there's a piano cadenza featuring rapid, rattling trills in the high end and some rapid scales played with gossamer touch. It catches the ear. Bavouzet seems to be playing at an even higher level than we normally hear him at. He seems like he's really engaged by this music, and it's really endearing to him. He's putting a lot across. The cadenza ends with some questioning chords, which break into circling arpeggio figuration and a repeated note and an octave run to the bass end. The orchestra comes in with explosive, big-boned gestures to bring the movement to a majestic ending. There's a lot of material to hear in this movement. It invites repeated listening. I'm sure everything I just told you isn't going to give you any kind of an idea what you're going to hear, because there's a lot to hear. And this is a movement that's going to invite repeated listenings, because there's just so much detail and so many different sections that just come in by surprise that it's going to be well worth hearing. The ending makes the movement sound like an independent piece in itself. The second movement, Andante, has gentle orchestration marked with light bell-like percussion and a high flute or piccolo. I can't really tell. The piano comes in playing a melody accompanied by repeated quarter note chords. The movement is less than half as long as the previous movement, and the orchestration and harmony in the strings is mirage-like, not quite coming into focus. The piano is the main focus of the movement. The orchestra will set background textures for the piano to play over. The middle section builds tension via a crescendo, which evaporates as the opening gentle theme comes back in the piano. Lovely touch by the orchestra at the ending, too. So I kind of feel like this is like the piano playing in front of a foggy background, let's say. Kind of nice. Third movement, Allegro Vivo. This bursts out with a bass drum and bell-like percussion at the beginning with the energy of the Ravel Piano Concerto in G major, if you know that one. It's in G, anyway. If you know that one, it just really starts racing, and this one does too. The piano has some cheerful, rapid scalar material to play. There's some smile-inducing brass glissandos placed in the foreground when they appear. Really funny, actually. Meanwhile, the flutes and other woodwinds imitate and play off the piano's line. Bavouzet really is magnificent here. His affection for the piece and its composer is palpable. He's constantly playing at high speed in this movement, and his energy never flags. At the 4-minute mark, the orchestra takes over the theme with upward brass glissandos erupting out of the texture like streamers at a party. There's a lot of interest in the orchestral color here along with the piano. Brass get a lot to do. At 5:23, the tempo finally slows down, and quite a bit. A darkness has crept into this irrepressibly happy movement, but it doesn't last long, lifting itself out and up to a majestic theme in the orchestra with many bass drum and percussion crashes. The piano gets a brief cadenza that brings it into its low bass end. The orchestra responds with a quiet line that the piano picks up and extends for an ending, which comes as rather a surprise. It's great to have a recording of this work. I was really glad to hear it. The next work is a symphony for string orchestra. It's shorter than the piano concerto, and it's full of, according to the booklet note, joviality, mischief, and even humor, except for a slow movement of touching depth. And those are Jean-Pascal Tortelier's words, the conductor. The first movement, marked Allegro Vivo, has a sawing opening by the low strings, with the violins playing the raucous theme. The movement is high energy and rather brief at 4 minutes, 9 seconds, and continues as rewritings of the opening, developing from those rhythms and patterns. There are inventive moments as when the melody is heard in the middle voices during a lull in the second minute. The theme is boisterous by the third minute, after which it slows down as though a brake is slowly being pressed, and gets to a suitable and still quick speed, with energy driving it to the end on several repeated chords. The second movement, Andante, has a poignancy, as Tortelier mentioned. It's quietly played, and the accompaniment comes across with great atmosphere. The movement of themes and accompaniment against each other is pleasing to the ear. Textures subtly change throughout the movement, and at the end of this 3-minute and 40-second movement, or at this point, the solo cello actually sounds like a reed instrument, with low bass pizzicati having a percussive feel. Third movement, Finale Presto. This movement picks up the pizzicati and places them in the high end of the violins with a more rapid tempo. This acts as accompaniment to the bowed themes, all brief and jumpy. At the 1-minute mark, we get a longer legato line in the violins and violas, while the cellos and basses play briefer, more percussive material. This reverses rather pleasingly sometime at around 1:40. The piece seems to have reached the end by 2:50, but then an eerie rising set of lines starts up, and the piece ends on a surprising, quiet chord. Track 8 is a piece called Commedia dell'arte from 1952. It's the overture to this work. Rushing material in the strings opens this movement, and breathy, whistling, harsh winds play out. The orchestra continues on as though we're caught in a whirlwind, with sounds like objects spinning around us. At 1:07, a hyperactive theme with glissandos in the brass is heard. There are comic changes of tempo and orchestration, the texture becoming spacious one moment, saturated the next. We reach a respite with a gliding theme at 1:45 or so. Surprising harsh sounds peek out of the texture at times. By the beginning of the third minute, we're hearing quiet, scurrying string lines, again with wise guy outbursts from the occasional wind instrument. This is another work with what sounds like a final cadence followed by comic outbursts from brass and winds. Another more emphatic cadence ends the work. Okay, tracks 9 through 11, the famous Sonatine for flute and piano from 1946. It's a set work for instrumental classes and was written for a competition at the Paris Conservatoire. This is the only chamber work on the album, too, and Adam Walker is the flautist on this piece. The first movement, Moderato, starts in a beautiful pastoral style, with light playing by Bavouzet on the piano, complementing the flute's light sound beautifully. This movement really moves at a fast pace. The piano has a lot of Sancan's beloved repeated notes. The rhythm is vibrantly adhered to, and in fact comes into high relief at this fast tempo, making the movement dance. Great athleticism is shown by both players. You can hear that this would be a competition piece. The movement ends, and the track continues with a piano line that sets up the slow movement. The flute comes in with a statement at the end that leads into the second movement, and continues the theme it started on track 10. This is a through-composed work, even though it's kind of separated into 3 sections. So the flute is playing its theme. The piano settles into a slow arpeggiated pattern. A sudden crescendo makes the passage at the beginning of the first minute register dramatically. Then the music falls back to the gentler opening theme. The flute gets a bit of a cadenza at the end of the movement when it gets up into its high end, playing dramatically, sounding beautifully full-toned in its lower end. The figuration speeds up to lead into the third movement, Animé. The piano starts this part, picking up the flute's line from the previous movement. There's some flutter-tonguing sound in the flute's tone in the first minute. The movement consists highly of repeated notes on both piano and flute, pretty piano figuration towards the end, and after which the flute solo plays the line leading to the end. The piano joins in for the last chords. And the program concludes with 4 encores that Sancan wrote for himself to play on solo piano. Track 12 is the Toccata for piano from 1943. This has a manically racing tempo in the opening. The piano is lightly played, rapidly repeating chord patterns split between both hands. Bavouzet gets a full-bodied sound in the bass that registers enough to be understood, but the recording lacks resonance. I really wish it was a little closer, and we could have used more of it. The recording is very dry. The brilliant performance is perfectly audible, though. The machine rhythm breaks up as tension-building patterns come in after 1:30. The perpetual motional patterns are back by the end, and the piece ends excitingly. It's a great performance by Bavouzet. Track 13 is a Caprice Romantique for the left hand alone for piano. Now, these kind of pieces were pretty common at the time, people coming back from the war with only one arm, but this is written for Sancan himself to play. I guess he wanted to sell it too. Anyway, it's a more romantic mode with lots of space and transparency in the material. The occasional harmonic twist gives away that this isn't written in the 19th century. At 1:33, a new section begins with questioning, wandering lines. The lines eventually crash into the deep bass end of the piano. More emphatic lines emerge from this, tempered by rubato. Listening to this performance, it's amazing to think it's only for the left hand. Yeah, it sounds full-body, and I've heard other left-hand pieces, including the Ravel piano concerto for the left hand. You can kind of tell it's for the left hand, even though there are like tricks to make it sound like it's for two hands. But this is really an incredible effect in this particular piece. Yeah, the illusion of two hands is well caught in the writing. At 5:09, an emphatic percussive sound takes us away from the romantique element, and the piece ends on a heavy cadence with a deep bass note. Track 14, Boîte à musique, which means the music box, and you'll hear why as soon as it starts. It has a pretty music box melody in the very high end of the piano, played with appropriately mechanical rhythm by Bavouzet. It's short at 1:58. At 34 seconds, it changes into a mid-tempo waltz. There's a lightly jarring note in the cadential chord at 1:01. The opening melody comes back, slower now, as the music box is winding down. Some odd harmonies are introduced, like the music box is breaking down, and Bavouzet produces the slowing of the music box beautifully. Apparently it's rapidly wound up again because the very last passage is played at full speed. Bavouzet in the notes mentions that Sancan had Alzheimer's disease at the end of his life, and Bavouzet himself says that when he plays this piece, he thinks of Sancan's brain breaking down at the point of the slowing of the music box, which adds kind of a poignancy to this piece, which is really very playful. I mean, I don't think it, that heaviness is in there, but Bavouzet himself thinks about it, he said. Anyway, the 15th track and final track is Mouvement for piano, marked Animé. It's an extremely rapid toccata-like piece with amazingly taken repeated notes. The tempo is breathless. At 1 minute and 10 seconds, there's a change to more fluid material, less block-like. The opening material returns at the end, and a rush up the keyboard leads to the final note, a very exciting way to end the program. And that's it. I'm glad I finally got to hear so much of Sancan's music. It was well worth it. As I said, the centerpiece is clearly the 28-minute piano concerto, which contains a lot of ideas in it. You can spend days just listening to that over and over again and finding new things in it, particularly in the first movement. Listeners, of course, will gravitate to the sonatine for flute and piano, but all of this is an enjoyable, light, and often clever discovery. Bavouzet's playing is brilliant throughout. He's really playing like over and above his normal, very high level. His affection for the composer and his music is palpable. Adam Walker is brilliant in the flute sonatine, and the BBC orchestra conducted by Pascal Tortelier play brilliantly and don't allow the energetic tempos to slacken. In fact, all of the performances on this album were exceptionally vivid rhythmically. My only qualm is the rather two-dimensional sound quality throughout. There are bursts of bass that enter the room, but most of the sound stays within the confines of the speakers, and the piano sound lacks resonance, but has plenty of detail. Nevertheless, this is now what I encourage everyone to hear, and this music's time has come. It should be better known, and I'm sure that everybody who hears it will enjoy the music.
Sancan's music's got a lot of humor and playfulness in it. Those trombone glisses in multiple pieces are just
especially the piano concertos, they just come out like that. Yeah, I
really enjoyed the overtures a lot, especially the comedy one. It has a real circus type atmosphere to it. You can almost imagine clowns dancing out. That said, it's all balanced with a nice sense of timbres and a full use of all the tones in the orchestra. I really enjoyed also the piano and flute concertos and the flute. No one writes for the flute like the French do. Yeah. And this has all that kind of dreaminess and rich atmosphere. And yeah, I enjoyed all of the music on this recording. The sound, as you say, could have been a little bit more multi-dimensional, but it's made up for by the playing, and Bavouzet and Walker shine as they always do. So excellent performances, very interesting and enjoyable music as well. Okay, over to the jazz side, and well, the theme is randomness. I just had some recordings I wanted to get out that don't have anything in common with them. Do a little bit of an international tour as always. And we're going to start out on the UK Ubuntu label, co-founded by the great trumpeter Quentin Collins, who we heard not too long ago on the podcast, and five-way split. His current group, great trumpeter, and doing nice things with recording new music there on Ubuntu label. And so we're going to get an Israeli guitarist. So we've got an Israeli guitarist on a UK label, talked about by two Americans in Japan. Can't get much more of a mix-up than that. Yeah. And this is Liraz's new recording, Squiggles. Came out May 19th. This is his debut on Ubuntu, and I believe his third album as a leader. He was born in Tel Aviv, Israel, in 1988. He took up the guitar when he was 9 years old, and he started playing jazz music. He majored in jazz at the Thelma Yellin High School, which I guess is a big music school for youngsters there. And he spent 4 years of that time studying under jazz guitar master Ofer Ganor. And then he also spent some time in New York studying under the great Peter Bernstein. And now he resides in Berlin. So an international career there. And he says of this recording that the songs take inspiration from their Israeli roots, as well as from the tradition of soul and blues playing that informs jazz music, with an aesthetic focus on exploring the canonical organ guitar combos of the 60s, such as Wes Montgomery, Melvin Rye, Grant Green, and Larry Young. He's got a couple of Israeli compatriots here. So we've got Liraz on guitar, Tal Balshai on organ, and Omri Gondor on drums. Let's jump right in with an Liraz original composition, A Straight Story. Well, Liraz starts this one out with a pickup line into a fun repeating, riffy kind of bluesy melody. The tune's an AABA 32 measure tune. A nice unexpected chord in the third measure of this A section gets you right away. And Balshai has a cool chugging walk on the organ bass going. But listen to the nice change up on the B section here in the organ part to bass intervals and the little glisses in the right hand. Liraz got a warm, clean, and upfront guitar tone here and all throughout the recording. He comes out with a break into the solo from the melody. He plays nice bluesy licks with a lot of snap in his lines. There's a really cool hesitated line in there that Balshai and Gondor respond to instantly. Nice interplay in this trio. And Balshai solos next, and I really like the gritty sound of the organ tone on here, and he's going to mix those tones up throughout this album. It's also got a clean attack with nice melodic ideas, some speedy lines, and a good bluesy climax to the solo. Liraz returns for some more bluesy soloing before they join up with the melody again on the B section and through the final A with a little slowdown into some final guitar licks before the last chord. It's good fun. And you'll notice right away from the start there's a real close-up sound quality to the recording. However, it does have a lot of panning to it. The guitar is dead center and drums are panned far to the right and organ to the left. So you feel like you're standing in the room turning your head to notice each player. Track 2, also by Liraz, Noah, N-O-A. This one has an interesting structure, interesting switch-ups, and a melancholy melody. It starts out in tempo, but with no drums. Liraz playing a 12-measure section of the melody over organ chords. Then Balshai takes over for an organ section that gets a swing feel for 6 measures, with a measure of break at the end for Liraz to pick up into the first melody section again, now with a kind of even Latin-type beat feel. The swinging organ section comes again, and then a break into Liraz's solo. They keep the Latin feel going, and he plays melodic, mostly fluid phrases with some nice pearly-sounding notes Towards the end, it switches up to a swing feel for a bit, and back to the Latin beat for Balshai's solo, and Gondor has some extra tappy drum ideas underneath that. They switch it up to swing for the end of the organ solo, and then they take it through both melody sections again, and it ends with a final phrase from the first section into a few final tasty licks from Liraz. Track 3, also by Liraz, Coco Loco, and this is a fun one, and Loco, yes, it will drive you a little loco to figure out the rhythms here. So it starts out with a 4-measure intro of syncopated descending guitar figures, and they're in a 6/8 meter. Then the melody starts. Now it's an AA-BA form, but it's quite interesting. The A section has stop time under the guitar licks for the first 4 measures, but they alternate between 4-beat and 3-beat measures. So is it really unusual? It sounds natural, but if you try to figure out what's going on, you'll say, wait, where'd those beats go? And then for the rest of the A, the last 4 bars, it just gets swinging. And then the B section is straight ahead 4/4. Liraz has some neat double stops there that go into fuller chords with some final cool interval figures that are synced up with the organ. And then the final A section has an extra 4 measures tagged on at the end with a break into the guitar solo. And the solo just stays in straight 4/4. Liraz got snappy and bluesy lines in his solo and an extra break in mid-solo there just to break it up a bit. Clean ride cymbals mark out the swing from Gondor, and then Balshai modulates some licks around in his solo that follows to get going and keeps to a kind of clean one-handed line type of playing. Gondor gets the solo for some sections, trading with chords from the organ and guitar, and they take another run through the melody with a nice extended coda into a 6/8 outro like the intro. And then Liraz has a really nice final rising chord line that reminded me of a guitarist I like a lot named Jimmy Ponder, who's not too well known, but that final lick is something that stylized from my memories of him. Track 4 is another Liraz original tune for MC. This one has kind of a bossa feel to it with a clicky beat. Liraz takes the melody on guitar. It has an interesting structure of a 17-measure melody section, then an 8-measure middle section, and then the first section again. There are syncopated chords the guitar hits together with the organ near the end of that section that give it some extra push. Liraz mixes up some double-time licks in this solo and some interesting rhythmic phrasing as well, and Balshai gets a clean organ tone on his solo on this one, working in the middle register, ending up in some tense chords. They take it through the melody sections once more to finish it out. Track 5, Liraz's Adrift. This is a speedy, swinging one, and Gondor gets it going with 8 measures of drum solo. Another uniquely structured melody here. There's a little syncopated riff for 2 measures after the drum opening, then an 8-measure kind of A section, that riff again, and a second repeat, another riff into a 16-measure contrasting section, and then directly into the A section with no riff, but a riff at the end that works as a solo break. So it has these like little kind of bookend riffs in spots. Anyway, Liraz is often running with speedy lines on this solo, sticking on some longer notes along the way, working down into the lower register. A riff break again switches things over to Balshai, who gets soloing with repeated note and interval ideas into some more zippy ideas with a lot of fun descending figures, working to a percussive finish. And Gondor gets a drum solo, mixing up a lot of ideas all around the kit. The others join in from the riff and then 16-measure section through to the end to finish it up. Track 6, another Balshai original, The Child in You. It's a happy-sounding tune in 6/8. There's an intro with a nice repeating syncopated guitar and organ bass riff for 4 measures. Balshai takes the melody. Check out the gritty organ tone here. I really like it. It's got an 8-measure section, then a 4-measure interlude of pearly ringing guitar notes, and a final 6-measure organ melody section. Balshai continues on with a solo. He plays some really fun rhythmic licks between nice melodic ideas and really spins off a repeated and sped up lick. Liraz comes in to trade some phrases with him with tasty double stops. They pick up the melody from the ringing guitar 4-measure section into the final organ line and connect it to an outro of the riff from the intro, while Balshai has really interesting descending organ lines. It's kind of cute and smiley altogether. Track 7, another Liraz original, Zattere. This one starts out with a cool rubato organ intro from Balshai with kind of Leslie speaker effects going on. Liraz and Gondor enter in tempo with the slow ballad melody, and Liraz sounds great at this slow tempo with his very clean tone, articulation, and squeezing all the juice in those little phrases. The melody's a kind of 12-measure phrase, and then Liraz works off from it to take 2 rounds of improvisation. Balshai mixes up long chords and then choppier figures, and Gondor has a light cymbal beat and other textures and hits underneath. Liraz gets more liquid kind of lines as he goes on here, and he continues on connecting to a final melody run with some shimmering chords added and some final licks to an unexpected final minor chord. And he has some really good bluesy bends in there as well. The title track, 8, Liraz's original as well, Squiggles. It's a bluesy shuffle feel for a 32-measure AABA tune with some cool chord changes. The B section contrasts nicely with a little minor guitar lick, alternating with thick guitar chords, and a little break for a guitar pickup lick into the final section. Liraz continues on soloing over Balshai's walking bass lines. He's sounding a lot more fluid here now, some low register licks and good melodic connection. And Balshai's got an organ solo on this one too, starting with some happy bouncy licks and building up some harmonic tension over the B section, working into more bluesy ideas and a nice gliss into some chords. Guitar and organ trade 4s with Gondor for the A sections and then return to the melody for the B and final A with a few final phrase repeats to the end.
Yeah, that's something I noticed too, that the guitar kind of like, he seems to get more like inspired as the album goes on. You know,
that's what I feel.
Yeah.
I feel like his phrasing was a neck for his ideas in the first couple tracks, like he was getting kind of stuck up on what he wanted to do. But as each tune goes on, things kind of like smooth out and his ideas kind of just come more freely.
Right.
And I don't know if that's the order that the tracks were recorded. It's just the impression I got.
Right. Well, you got it too. So there you go.
There you go. Well, track 9's an original by Balshai called Journey to the Unknown. And it starts out with a fittingly mysterious mood, an 8-measure intro with a soft organ bass ostinato, kind of a light rock beat from Gondor, and little figures and interval ideas on top from Liraz's guitar. Balshai takes the 16-measure minor melody on organ, and Liraz plays syncopated backing chords. The melody has some fun harmonic twists on the way, and some rhythmic syncopated rising lines from the 13th measure. They go around twice, and Liraz is up for a turn at it with some synced up rhythmic lines with the others and a longer final held note. Back to another round from Balshai with some triplet figures in the final measures this time into an improvised solo. He keeps the mysterious mood with smooth flowing lines and some speedy undulating kind of lines as well. And then he gets more animated and choppy for a climax. Liraz follows, starting with tasty bluesy licks and now more fluid lines. And he's sounding better and better as the recording goes on, I thought. And he finishes up getting back to the melody idea. And then Balshai gets another final melody run on the organ to some final vamping and guitar and organ crazy licks that come along as it fades out. I thought it's an thoroughly enjoyable guitar organ trio recording. It draws on and reminds you of 60s organ trios, but with all original compositions, it has a freshness to the program. The tunes have catchy melodies and unique atmospheres with different rhythmic flows, and upon a close listen, they reveal some unique structures and a few tricky meter switch-ups. Liraz has got a warm, upfront, and clean guitar tone, not hiding in any kind of reverb or effect.
Oh, yeah.
It can get different sound qualities, sometimes with pearly notes. His solos are melodic, little bluesy touches, and a mix in of double stops and thick chord ideas sometimes. His phrasing seems to become more flowing and fluid as the recording unfolds. Balshai's organ work sounds great here with a nice variety of bass lines, interesting solos, and what I liked best, a variety of tones from clean and percussive to a bit gritty, and they all suit the atmosphere for each song well. And Gondor's a good match on the drums, fitting in with subtle drumming in soft passages, good grooves in different feels, and some solo spots where he mixes things up nicely. The recording sounds good. It's upfront and natural sounding. As I said, the organ is panned left and drums to the right, so I found it more enjoyable to listen to with speakers rather than headphones where both ears hear a kind of natural mix of the positions of the instruments.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. Oh, by the way, you didn't mention that the last track of the album fades out. So, something I don't approve of, as we all know from a jazz track. Right. And it was really going, there was some good stuff being played there. And then it faded out. I was like, no, just keep going. Right. Anyway, on this album, I enjoyed the organ playing, especially all the way through. He had like really great ideas, good presence, good sounds. Yeah. I really enjoyed that. And as you mentioned, I thought the guitar I liked too, but I felt like he kind of like warmed up as the album went on, and he's fine throughout, really right from the beginning. But something more is coming out of him by the end.
Fluidity.
The track I liked best was "The Child in You" with its odd organ sound and interesting solo ideas on the guitar. "Journey to the Unknown" had an appealing groove and theme and kept me interested.
Reminded me of The Doors or something like that.
I think that's a good comparison. I didn't really made that connection. It's like, but the 1960s. Anyway, it's a good album. Pleasant, good soloing, and I thought especially from the organ. I just liked the organ anyway. Yeah. But I liked all of his sounds too. He was pretty creative with those as well as his playing.
I can hardly pass up on organ trio recordings.
Yeah,
especially
I noticed.
Kind of interesting. Yeah.
We've heard a lot of them this year, but I don't get tired of them either. We both really like them a lot.
All right, we're going to go from organ trio to piano trio, and we're going to cross the Atlantic and move further south to Argentina. And now remember, you're going to have heard this first on the Adult Music Podcast. And I came across this recording and didn't know anything about it, but I liked what I heard. So then when I decided we would feature it, I investigated a little bit and I got a few surprises. This is Escenarios. It's on the Los Años Luz Discos label, so I guess the light years. And it's the pianist Javier Burin, and his trio is rounded out by Esteban Freites on bass and Juan Cava on drums. And there's no English information available about this artist or recording, so did a little Spanish detective work.
Ooh,
and
getting into the Spanish.
This is Burin's debut as a leader. He's recorded on a couple other albums, inspired by his music idols, Johann Sebastian Bach, which will become clear at some point, Keith Jarrett, which will also become clear.
Keith Jarrett also inspired by Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yes, and maybe CPE as well, since that new recording.
Oh, we'll talk about that at the end of July, okay, or beginning of August.
Anyway, the surprising thing about Javier Burin is he was born in 2001, so that's going to make him 22 years old. Wow. And that should give you some thing to think about as you hear this recording. He was born in Buenos Aires. He began his formal music studies with a scholarship from the Instituto Musicarte 21 in 2010. He started 3 levels of musical language learning: cello and drums and rock band workshop. That's kind of interesting. And he was a singer, bassist, and drummer as well. Then 2013, he entered the Juan Pedro Esnaola School of Music, and 2019, he entered the Manuel de Falla Conservatory for Jazz Studies, and he still studies classical piano, jazz, piano harmony, ensemble, and counterpoint. And well, this is going to be an interesting mix of material. And for our friends at The Same Difference, check out the versions of standards on this recording. This guy's bursting with talent. And remember, you're probably going to, if you listen to our podcast, you're not going to hear this anywhere else. But someday I think you're going to hear about this kid. We're going to start out with Cole Porter credited tune, but it's not Night and Day. It's called Night and Night. And I think he should change the title because he's changed the tune in some interesting ways here. With this, Porter's song when it came out is a little bit unusual for the time because it kind of had this 48-bar chorus. There was a B, A, B, C, B form. And the C is the bridge in that form. But so it's going to be presented differently here. And so drum tom fills pickup into the 8-bar intro of descending bass and left-hand piano figures injected with piano chords. And Mike, can you guess what time signature this tune is in?
Well, being that we've been talking about it so often, I'm going to say 7/8 because
yes.
I wouldn't have identified it myself, of course.
That's 5 episodes in a row, with records picked by random other criteria, and they all have 7/8 tunes on them. So there's something in the air.
Something in the air.
Anyway, keep your ear on those left-hand patterns that you hear at the beginning because they will be under the melody here in this interestingly reharmonized and remetered version of this tune. We get 24 measures of the melody from Burin's piano and those left-hand figures. So the original, as I said, has this 48-bar structure, and we're just getting kind of a section of it. Nice crisp cymbal work and drums from Cava here, and then it gets turned over to Freitas for an extended bass solo out of the box with rhythmically energetic phrases. Burin gets a solo next. It's an interesting one. I like how he starts out with reworked ideas from the melody. You can kind of hear where he's jumping from, and he builds up with choppy phrases. And he's got those Keith Jarrett-esque vocalizations in the background that you hear as well. He builds into more extended lines of ideas and a really forceful left hand that pushes things along, sometimes with two-handed figures and blocky chords. Some more of the left-hand figures transition back to another 24-measure melody segment to wrap it up. It's a very interesting start to get things going. Track 2, moving to a Burin original PF, and I wonder if that's for pianoforte. This one starts with some repeated ringing chords on piano and bass, unevenly spaced to create a feeling of anticipation. Burin takes the minor melody that moves closely with his chords. Basically what he has here is a pretty and melancholy 8-measure melody that repeats 4 times with little variations. And it reminded me of back in the spring, we heard the great Czech pianist Emil Viklitsky. And he was a master at this, taking a short melody and turning it into like a whole, incredible performance. It's kind of the idea here, I think. But again, listen to the rhythm on this track. The feel is like a slow 4, but you'll notice that it's missing the last 8th note. So effectively, this is another 7/8 meter. It's just jumping ahead, missing that last expected beat. Freitas' bass rings softly, and Cava has nice light snare textures underneath everything. There's more ringing chords, like in the opening, to make a transition to bass and drums, then dropping out and Burin continuing on solo. Listen to how he builds things up and the interaction of his hands, and I thought this really shows some kind of Bach invention kind of influence in his stylings here. Freitas and Cava return with the rhythm, and Burin continues soloing with a really nice connected flow of lines and ideas, the odd meter keeping things pushing forward. He builds in intensity and then speed to a climax of zipping lines, comes down for a bit, and then builds up with ringing piano over Cava's busy drums. It stops suddenly into more ringing intro chords and a final short descending piano line, and a pretty final Picardy third in the end. You don't hear that too often.
Especially in jazz.
Yeah, an ode to his classical training. We're going to get another standard here. Maybe this is my pick of the album for inventive reworked tunes. Beautiful Love, Wayne King, Victor Young, Egbert Van Alstyne. An old standard. Of course, Bill Evans' version is very famous. I also like John Hicks' great pianist version of it a lot too. And you'll probably not hear it like this reinvention again. I actually like this so much I posted this one on our Facebook page yesterday because I thought everyone should hear this. Burin starts it out solo with rapid triplet figures that have a kind of 6-beat feeling. Bass and drums join in on the 5th measure of that, but the bass has a syncopated figure with a 4-beat pattern. So now you've got this interesting polyrhythmic action for a total of 12 measures of intro, depending on how you count it. The melody continues with the rhythmic trickiness. I guess it's like in 4, but check out the tricky bass and left-hand piano figures. And Burin interjects more right-hand rhythmic figures on the way. There's so much going on in here. It does simmer down, then into a bass solo from Freitas with aggressive attack and motion. Burin's next, starting from shorter rhythmic phrases into ringing chords, and he's going to let loose on this one. Blazing runs, bluesy percussive chords, exploding with energy. They bring it back down for another run through the melody before Cava gets to take a drum solo that he builds up slowly with more intricate ideas around tight snare work at the center. The others join back in gradually to build up a swelling vamp of sound around him and end with the piano triplet figures like we heard in the intro. A Burin original for track 4, Wengro. And this starts as a ballad waltz. Burin plays the sparse melody with chords, and there's a bass pulse for each measure. We hear 2 8-measure segments, but then from the 17th measure, things get interesting with undulating lines. It's kind of like the carpet is being rumpled and pulled under your feet, loosening the waltz feel for a bit before it returns. And then a double chime groove kind of briefly forms in Cava's drums, but then is kind of retracted. Burin builds ringing 2-handed chords. There's a reset back to the melody in simplicity, and then into more chord-based improvisations from Burin that build in intensity and rhythmic variety. It transforms into a swinging waltz with ride cymbal and walking bass for a bit as Burin gets into some high-register lines of improvisation. Things get soft again for another melody section that soon gets more rumbling, and the little double-time thing is heard again, and then a final melody section into pressing chords and final trickles that Burin holds out as it fades away. It's kind of like a recurring theme and different variations, I felt, as it comes back to the source and then expands on it. So it's a fresh and flowing kind of tune. Now, track 5, Sonny Rollins' Tenor Madness. And, historically, this is an interesting tune because it's from the album of the same name. It's the only known recording featuring both Sonny Rollins and John Coltrane. But it's kind of funny. I've heard other tenor players play it, but I've never heard it really without a sax. And, it's originally kind of a straight 12-bar blues tune, but hold on to your seat and strap in for this one. Burin starts it out with a cycle of chords. They get a few skips in the rhythm, and then you start to see what's happening here. He takes the melody at express train speed, while the bass and drums and his left hand stick with the opening loping feel, meter and tempo. Then, with a few switches ups to match what's going on in the right hand on the way, once they get going into the piano solo, everyone keeps it speedy, and it gets really flying and frantic with plenty of vocalizations behind it. He works through a rhythmic romp on the way and through some repeated ringing right-hand figures before it dissipates into ringing and slow bass figures from Freitas, who gets left all alone then to work on the start of his solo. And Burin enters with backing chords, hinting at things to speed up, and then the bass line gets busier, Cava adding soft brushwork to work the fast tempo. Burin and Cava trade some 12-bar choruses and then shorter 4-measure phrases, then a return to the intro idea for another run through the melody, the big pause before the final chord. Yes, it's madness in rhythms, but it's an exciting bit of fun on this tune. Track 6, another Burin original, Navidad.
Which is Christmas, right?
Yeah, I guess.
A little early Christmas here as summer comes.
It starts with 2 minutes of solo piano on Burin's slow melody with interesting bass line movement and chords that keep an even kind of push forward. Burin then introduces a hint of syncopation just before the bass and drums come in. Freitas is on electric bass here. Cava's cymbal get a flowing groove going. Then Freitas gets an interesting effect also through the solo as it goes. Listen to the developing piano and left-hand interaction then. Things open up and transform into a fast swing with a walking bass for a piano solo from Burin, bursting with energetic lines and percussive chords. He works into rippling high notes and then chiming chords, then back into the previous groove with bass figures to finish it up. And what you'll notice about this young player is his left hand is really impressive in its independence, forcefulness, and kind of expression of different ideas, even when his right hand is doing things in parallel. Track 7, John Coltrane's Moment's Notice. Now, if you know this tune, you can recognize the melody here, but it's going to take another rhythmic transformation compared to what you're used to. The first section feels almost like a slow 5-beat feel that then transforms into a doubled up 4-beat. And that feel keeps shifting until they transform it into a driving fast 4/4 swing under Burin's piano solo. They pull it back for another transformed melody section before it gets quiet for an acoustic bass solo from Freitas with busy lines, but only soft drum textures, and back to the driving swing for more piano from Burin with really well-connected extended lines working up and down the keyboard into chiming chords. They get back to the melody once again, then take it into completely new syncopated vamp for Cava to roll out some tight drum ideas. One more melody run, and then they end it with a modulated chiming chord idea from Burin to a slowdown. And the last track is an original by the bassist Freitas called Interstitio. Burin starts it with a sparse rubato piano opening. Bass and drums join in on a rising synced line with piano. It's at a slow dirge of a tempo and a short melancholy melody line of about 10 measures, depending if you include the last measure, that ends with a synced up rising line in the piano and bass. Cava has interesting soft subdivisions that give it motion, and Freitas gets a ringing bass solo over tom work from Cava. Burin's got a solo as well of hauntingly ringing chords and notes working into rhythmic interval ideas that speed up into waves, and then a final, slowly unfolding melody line, ending up with that rising line we've heard previously. And that's it. Burin's a kind of busting with talent and bursting with energy on this adventurous debut. His own compositions and also the final original from Freitas are comparatively introspective, but it's the reworking of the jazz standards with complex rhythmic ideas that really stand out here. Great piano sound, phrasing, excellent solos, and a left hand that constantly draws your attention. At 22 years old, what's he going to be like when he's 30? It's scary to imagine. Freitas and Cava are fine too, working in sync on the challenging transformations and ready at a moment's notice to shift gears with the pianist. I like the electric bass variety thrown in there too for a little different effect. And I don't know when this young pianist's name is going to show up and get attention in the English and international press somewhere, but definitely keep your eye and ear out for him.
I think this is the third pianist that you've kind of discovered for me, you know, so that I can find the other two. Stephen Feifke was one. He's an arranger, and also Billy Test you liked a lot too.
Yeah, I love Billy Test.
And when I think about, you know, the way you say, oh, these young pianists are just really great, and you'll have to hear them. Now you have another one here.
Yeah.
I kind of put him in that class, I guess, Javier Burin, except he's a little different. I mean, you know, he's Argentinian, first of all.
Yeah.
And the first thing I noticed, even before you told me that he considered Bach and Keith Jarrett as his influences, there's a lot of classical elements in the playing here. And Bach would, you know, sort of indicate that, since it's such a notey technical music. And Keith Jarrett, too, because he improvised a lot, but he had a big technique as well, you know, so, you know, almost a classical technique. So he really is in that sort of realm, let's say, on this album. Also, even the way his compositions go, they build up and release tension, more like a classical work than a jazz work, you know, right? So it's pretty interesting. His piano playing, he has a beautiful tone as well. The technique is very clean and even. Yeah, he has this way of playing classical patterns and jazz rhythms, so the music has a sense of moving in a certain harmonic direction, even though it's like, and then he'll have like some straight jazz licks as well. It's a nice kind of trick for me that worked really well on this album. The jazz elements, of course, come through, and this is a jazz album first and foremost. It's a great sounding recording too, I think. The sound of the trio is richly captured. Good compositions, many of them are very pretty, and there's some swinging moments in them too. Yeah, all in all, this is a bit of a surprise, and now you got something else for me to sort of pursue, and I hope we're the ones that introduce him to an English-speaking audience.
Yeah, he deserves to be heard, and you know, someone this young, he just with all this talent, you wonder what direction they'll go in next. But
we'll be keeping our eyes on, I'm sure.
Scary to be that good at such a young age.
Yeah, how do they do that? And not only that, there's so many.
Yeah,
you know, it's like to have such talent. You know, like.
All right, and unusual for me, I got a vocal pick for my last.
You like vocal recordings? It just depends who it is, really.
I'm just extremely picky about vocals. You got to have a voice that I want to hear,
right?
Or else, you know, that's why I don't do many vocal episodes, and it's really hard for me to wait to get 3 that I really like.
It really is a very personal sound. Like it's
exactly.
Like it's tied to the person. They can't really change it. So
yeah. Anyway, I do like this one a lot, and this is the vocalist Robin McKelle with her new recording Impressions of Ella Fitzgerald, that is, on the Doxie label. This came out June 2nd. And I was also attracted because, she's got one of the best accompanists in the world. You can't do any better than Kenny Barron.
On the piano. Yeah, one of my favorites.
And not only that, but the rest of the rhythm section, Peter Washington, Kenny Washington, who, are often together in other combos. Well, they're part of the Bill Charlap trio, who just always knocks us out whenever we hear one of his recordings. And so I was attracted, just from the personnel here. Now, Robin McKelle, her birth name is Robin McElhatton, if I'm saying that correctly. She's from Rochester, New York, so another upstate New York native, mostly fond memories of youth. Yeah,
I think we all have mostly fond memories of youth. There's those ones that are kind of,
Right.
Yeah.
She's the daughter of a liturgical vocalist, and she took classical piano lessons and also played French horn for 10 years. And I wonder if that's got something to do with her keen sense of pitch, because brass players have to listen really carefully. The brass instruments aren't perfectly in tune.
Yeah, and especially the French horn, which seems like a really tough instrument to get in tune and get a good tone out of. Yeah,
exactly. She attended University of Miami and also went on to Berklee College of Music, graduating in 1999. She also taught voice classes there for 3 years. She took 3rd place in the 2004 Thelonious Monk Vocal Jazz Competitions in Washington, D.C. And her debut recording, 2006, introducing Robin McKelle, has her swinging on standards with a big band backing things up. And her next recording was, rather swinging jazz oriented, but she's also done kind of rhythm and blues and more rocky material. And if you check out her recordings with the fly tones like Heart of Memphis, there's some country and other influences mixed in there. And her last recording before this one, 2020 Alterations, it's kind of got a jazzy and also some kind of pop sensibilities melded into it. But here she's taking a big slice, of jazz history with tunes from the catalog of the great Ella Fitzgerald. So if you're going to do that, well, you couldn't ask for a better rhythm section than this. Impressions of Ella. So what's the impression? Well, I think it comes through as we dive into the material. I'll give you a little historical perspective on the tunes. And, I forgot to mention, we'll also get a little guest appearance from Kurt Elling along the way, too, on one tune. So we're going to start out with Oh, the Devil Moon, Burton Lane and Yip Harburg tune. Ella Fitzgerald originally recorded this in 1955 with an orchestra directed by Benny Carter. Well, this one gets started with a 12-measure trio intro with a very cool bass ostinato line from Peter Washington. They keep that going as McKelle starts the verse, but switch it up to a nice chugging walking bass and swing feel right from the Old Devil Moon lyric on the B section. McKelle has a really good swing feel, lightness, and she has that sense of a little lilt in the phrasing that made Fitzgerald so fun to listen to. She's not copying it. She's still got her own persona.
Yeah, she really doesn't sound anything like Ella Fitzgerald.
No. But that phrasing...
She doesn't even try to do the style. But yeah, I know what you mean.
That lilt is apparent in there. Yeah. And so I enjoyed that. The trio keeps the rhythmic feel change-ups going with nice little breaks as well. There's a solo break for Barron to get a really smooth and relaxed piano solo on this one. Then they reset with the ostinato feel for McKelle to return with more verses. She has nice subtle embellishments and a really great sense of pitch. The trio ends it with a tight syncopated ending. Track 2, My One and Only, not to be confused with My One and Only Love, another jazz standard. This is just My One and Only. Guy Wood, Ira Gershwin, Robert Mellon, and George Gershwin. Written for the 1927 Broadway musical Funny Face. And so Ella Fitzgerald recorded this a few times, 1951 with Ellis Larkins, 1959 with Nelson Riddle. This one is a piano and vocal duo, just Barron and McKelle, and Burin gets it going with a medium-tempo, bouncing 8-measure intro. McKelle has a fun time with the enunciation on this one, little pushing accents on the lines, and Burin has a solo with a great groove. His left hand keeps everything together on this tune. McKelle is back for another verse and a kind of bluesy ending with some high chimes from Burin and a little rhythmic ending. Very nice duo. Track 3, Billy Strayhorn's Lush Life. Ella Fitzgerald recorded this originally in 1957, and she also did a version with Joe Pass, the great guitarist, in 1974. It's a flowing rubato solo piano intro from Burin. McKelle sounds really good on this tune. Nice phrasing on the rising lines and a mix of sultry and tenderness in the qualities. Bass and drums come in on the Life is Lonely Again line. But Kenny Washington is so soft. He's barely audible. If he's there at all in spots, I think he might have gone out for a sandwich because he wasn't needed too much. He could just pick up light drums somewhere. This tune requires a lot of quick jumps of vocal register and dynamic contrasts, and McKelle sounds very confident doing so. Peter Washington gets a warm and busy bass solo in contrast here, and McKelle is back to finish things off, and the final rising line on Those Whose Lives Are Lonely Too is very nicely synced with the piano and bass. Great subtle vibrato on the last note to end it. Track 4, this is a big Fitzgerald one because she would swing the hell out of it whenever she would sing it. How High the Moon, a William Lewis, Nancy Hamilton tune. It's from the 1940 Broadway review Two for the Show, and Ella Fitzgerald recorded in 1948 and also 1960 live with the Paul Smith Quartet. I think she has another recording of it on Verve in 1964 as well. It's one of her main pieces. The trio starts this one out with an 8-measure intro of some playfully hesitated chords and drum fills from Kenny Washington. It gets off to a chugging swing, starting with the How High the Moon is the name of this song verse, which I think Fitzgerald sang as a last verse sometimes, because it usually starts with the Somewhere There's Music. That's how I always think of this tune. It doesn't start with that, but you can see why. Then Kenny Washington gets a little solo break, and then McKelle comes in with the Somewhere There's Music verse, and it's like shifted up to high gear for a faster swing. So it's got this dual tempo kind of thing setting it off. It's a nice change up. Well, she's got the swing and the lilt here, little fun hesitation. She can get that little burr or almost like a vocal fry just for a split second in things, which is kind of nice. We get a little scatting mid-verse for fun as well. And then Burin has an animated piano solo. When McKelle returns, they mix up the feel in fun ways. First with ringing repeated bass and cymbal hits, and then they downshift it into the slower swing tempo from earlier again for an ending with a nice high note from McKelle. Track 5, I Won't Dance, Jerome Kern and Dorothy Fields. Well, originally it was for 1934 London musical Three Sisters, which flopped. And it was forgotten. And then the next year, Fields helped to redo this for a film version, and that was for the musical Roberta. And then, it became a jazz standard as well. Ella Fitzgerald recorded it in 1957. Also, Ella and Louis with Louis Armstrong.
Right.
That's in 1957. And then she recorded it with Nelson Riddle in 1962. And Burin and McKelle get it out to a flowing rubato start. And then we get a little conversation going with Kurt Elling worked into the main tune. They trade off phrases playfully. They're having a good time. And Elling sounds really nice when he can get in that lower baritone range.
He's got this really suave voice, He kind of sounds really like a man about town, And
I like the contrast, the playfulness. They're traded lines, but when they sync up together on shared lines, it's pretty tight, and that works well. The trio gives it a lifting modulation midway through the tune for another round of the vocal parts. And they finish up with some fun conversational exchanges over a little vamp by the trio into a final, nicely harmonized I Won't Dance lyric. Yeah. So good fun and nice.
She has some classy sounding French on this track too, I have to say. Yeah,
she does. Yeah, I like her voice in general, but, maybe I want to hear her sing all in French too. You know?
That could be okay. Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's just the human voice. That's why I feel I'm really hot or cold when I hear a vocalist. You know,
Right.
I mean, most of them are right out, but you know, she's right in right from the start, and so far I'm enjoying everything, and that's going to continue with George and Ira Gershwin's "Embraceable You." Go all the way back to 1928 for an unpublished operetta, East is West, and then it was published in 1930 for the Broadway musical Girl Crazy. Ella Fitzgerald recorded in 1959 with Nelson Riddle, also as part of a medley in 1983 with Andre Previn on the recording Nice Work If You Can Get It. Here it's got a gentle solo piano opening from Baron and a bass pickup line into the melody, soft ballad drum brushwork from Kenny Washington, and ringing tones from Peter Washington make a nice canvas for McKelle, who sounds relaxed, warm, and has a really good attention to dynamics on this tune. Baron has a tasty tinkling solo here with ringing high register notes, and McKelle returns for a final verse and nicely slowed ending with a descending piano line that then works into rising clusters of notes over bowed bass. Kenny Barron's the one you want to be your accompanist. I mean,
I know he's good all the way through. Really, yeah.
He's a great pianist, but he really makes other people shine. You know, like those recordings he did, Stan Getz' last recordings, just the two of them. Oh, yeah, he just makes everyone sound great. And if I was a vocalist, I'd want him behind me.
All right. I want to say something else about this tune. George Gershwin, we always think of him as the great melodies and all this thing. But when you have titles like Embraceable You or, Nice Work If You Can Get It, these are great titles.
Yeah,
that's Ira coming up with those, I think.
Right.
And just the whole thing is just so tight and fantastic. They were a great songwriting team.
Yes, indeed. All right. Another great tune for track 7. Duke Ellington and Bob Russell, Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me. And Ella recorded this with Duke Ellington and his orchestra in 1957. Baron gets it going with a solo opening, and McKelle joins in with a flowing rubato. Bass and vocals move together nicely with piano answering phrases as it gets going. That was a nice touch. Great relaxed tempo and feel, and fine phrasing from McKelle here. They make some trio breaks for her to belt out phrases with some bluesy zest on this one, and Baron has a restrained, in contrast, and delicate solo. It's the longest track on the recording, and after McKelle returns, they finish it up with some final phrase repeats of "You Never Will." Yeah, classy take. We've got Robin's Nest by Illinois Jacquet and Charles Thompson. I'm not sure about when Ella Fitzgerald recorded this, maybe 1947 on the Verve label. I think you can only find it kind of in like collections and recordings from certain years, so I'm not sure what the name of the original recording would have been. Anyway, here after a bouncy intro with a break, McKelle has really good interactions with Peter Washington's floating the lyrics over the bass line's tight hi-hat as well until Baron comes back with chords. A nice inflection on the all the way down lyrics in there, and she transitions it into some fun scatting as well. Peter Washington gets a bass solo midway with great rhythmic attacks, and Baron follows him. Then McKelle has a really great bluesy swooping phrases in the final lines of the tune to close it out. Track 9, Taking a Chance on Love, Vernon Duke, Ted Fetter, and John Latouche from the 1940 Broadway musical Cabin in the Sky. Fitzgerald recorded this all the way back in 1955. She also did a version with Andre Previn as director of the orchestra. And I really like the intro on this one. Rising piano chords to rumbling holds with skittering cymbals for McKelle to build up some tension with the repeated "Here I Go Again" line. And it really builds up. And then a bumpy, syncopated "Taking a Chance" repeated section that's punctuated by Kenny Washington before the tune gets off to a light swing with loping bass lines contrasting with ringing repeated notes. A nice phrasing from McKelle here again as she gets into some lyric and scat vocal exchanges with Baron's piano before he stretches out for a bit on his own with some great two-handed ideas in his solo. A good build up to the end, using that intro idea of rising chords to push it to a held out note from McKelle, and I really enjoyed this arrangement of the tune. All right, track 10, April in Paris, Vernon Duke and Ip Harburg. This is 1932 for the Broadway musical Walk a Little Faster, and Ella Fitzgerald recorded this 1956 with Count Basie, same year also with Louis Armstrong, and 1976 version of it with Oscar Peterson. Well, it's a unique one here. The intro has these high ringing repeated bass and drum clicks over Baron's soft piano. It's a relaxed and even beat for McKelle to phrase softly over with the lyrics, almost getting into a kind of cha-cha groove. This is an even kind of beat here. Baron builds a classy solo on this tune, and then after McKelle returns for another verse, they transform the ending into a kind of a dreamy modal mood. It almost sounds like a soft maiden voyage kind of ending take to it. So, yeah, I thought it was a nice transformation.
Fades out, though.
Yeah, it does fade out.
Oh, man.
We're going to end up with another tune by the Gershwins soon, and this is for 1930, a revision of the musical Strike Up the Band. Ella Fitzgerald recorded this in 1951 with Ellis Larkins. So this is also just a piano and voice duo to finish things up. So soft and ringing piano from Baron makes an intro, joined by McKelle with gentle phrasing on the lyrics. She builds up intensity gradually, and Baron takes a masterfully restrained piano solo here. When McKelle returns, it really gets infused with an R&B sense for a climax, and I completely forgot about Ella as Robin McKelle channels Gladys Knight for us here.
Oh, yeah.
And then it all comes down to a gentle and soft ending. Yeah, wise choice to save this one for the last tune, but I like the little peek of other influences in here. So as I mentioned, I'm picky about vocalists, which is why I don't choose many vocal recordings for our program. But this recording gets high marks from me. Robin McKelle has a pleasing tone quality to her voice that makes me want to keep listening to her. But in addition to that, she's got great pitch control, phrasing, and enunciation, and she shows a very mature style. She doesn't oversing on this recording. She captures the swinging spirit and happy lilt of Ella Fitzgerald while keeping her own personality. The arrangements are tasty with little twists on rhythmic feels and change-ups along the way. You can't ask for a better rhythm section than this one here. And Kurt Elling makes for a fun guest midway through. Some of McKelle's R&B influences peek through as a reminder of her versatility, and I imagine I'm going to be listening to this recording again more in the future.
Yeah, well, the first thing I need to say is I loved all the songs on this album. You really can't go wrong. They're just such great songs. And McKelle, as you said a lot of this already, I think she's an inviting vocalist. She's got this rich, warm tone. And I liked also she has this comfortable sort of intimacy in the ballads. You know, it's intimate, but it's like someone you've been with for a while. So you kind of have that, you know, that kind of feeling. It makes you feel gives you a good feeling. Yeah, the real appeal of these interpretations, I'd say, is her tone. She sings these familiar songs in a straightforward fashion, which is also nice to hear because I want to get I always want to hear updated versions of these songs sung as straightforwardly, more or less. We don't hear enough of them nowadays, I think, these songs. But when I think of say, because she mentioned Ella Fitzgerald, I think of Ella's performance of the songs, she added a lot of life to them, and we get it. We have that here in McKelle's too. But Ella's just so, she's got such life to her singing that I can't really forget her. I like the forward vocals and the fidelity to the songs. I think I would have liked her to take a few more chances at times. I was thinking when she had the conversation, I Won't Dance. It was fun. It was the conversation she had with Kurt Elling. Yeah, it's playful, but it's kind of more sophisticated and classy in style. It's just who she is, I think. But I was thinking about Lady Gaga on the Tony Bennett album, like they did "Lady Is a Tramp," and it was kind of the interplay was fun when it was more fun in that case. It was sort of fun here too, but I just wanted a little bit more of that. I think that's all. That's the only thing I have. It's great singing though, I have to say. Yeah. I may even wind up getting this. We'll have to see.
Yeah. like I say, check out some of her earlier albums. And I think maybe the hard thing that's been for her over her career is deciding really which direction to go in. Because she's really good at more R&B and rocky type things. And she shows here that she can really swing too. So where should she focus? I don't know.
Yeah, well, here's another example I've got here. Like she's on How High the Moon, she scats for a bit, but only for a short time. I would have liked to have heard her like stretch that out a bit and see where she would go with it. You know, that's what I mean. I wanted to hear more of that sort of thing. Yeah, good, beautifully recorded. It's kind of a little, it could have been a little less formal, I think. That's all. Okay, that's it. But great singing, though, and good renditions of these songs. I was really happy to hear them again. And beautiful voice. I can't really praise her tone and vocalism enough, really. Very good.
It passed my strict standards for a voice that I can continue listening to and smiling about, you know. So really good. I wonder what she'll do next, if she'll continue on with some more swing type things or I enjoyed hearing her voice on the other styles as well. And those recordings have really good instrumentation too. So if you haven't heard McKelle's previous work, go back and check that out. There's a mix of all kinds of things there. She's very versatile and talented. All right, that's episode 119. We're going to be
in the can,
cranking over to 120 next week.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, we've exceeded 700 recordings now.
Yeah. So. To think that I would have listened to all those recordings, not those recordings, but 700 recordings anyway, but not with my computer in my lap.
Well, you know, I'd like to put it out there. If there's anyone out there who can tell us that they've listened to more music than we have, I'd like to know about them and see if they have any other problems in their life.
I have to say I don't think I'd ever want to meet them though. So just let us know. Well, but don't visit.
Neither one of us would have time to meet each other.
Yeah, we wouldn't have time to meet them anyways. Too busy listening to music, right?
Anyway, we've got a plan already for next week. You've got an interesting program lined up there.
Well, we have been talking about doing a sax program, and I had three. Well, I don't actually have 3 sax recordings. I have 2 classical sax recordings. Very rare to have, and I had 2 of them. And one of them is Alban Gerhardt on the cello and a sax quintet. So I decided to round the program out with a cello album too. And I know you like cello music, so I thought we'd put that your way. So we're going cello. We're going cello and sax quintet. Then we're going cello, and then we're going solo sax. Our favorite sax, the baritone sax.
Oh yeah. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this week. It'll be a pretty interesting week. It's going to be all brassy again, though.
Unfortunately, I didn't have any bari sax on my list, and I didn't have a real good group of sax music.
This might be the only bari sax classical album we ever hear on this podcast.
Very possible, yeah.
It's very possible.
So I've got...
so make sure you tune in, people.
A cracking new trombone release that just came out on the Positone label. So we get a new Positone recording out there. And then I've got 2 big band recordings.
One of which for a big band. Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you about. It's going to be a secret because it's going to be a preview recording. You know, something we've got access
a pre-release because
pre-release.
We're special.
So we're going to check that out and let you know about it a week before you can hear about it. So you can listen to us talk about it first and then check it out later in the week, next week. So if you want to know what that is, well, it won't be on a playlist, but I'll get it listed up. Anyway, that playlist for the rest of the albums will go up on Deezer and Facebook a few hours after this episode. So if you want to get listening early, go check us out on Facebook or Deezer, and you can find out what those recordings are. As always, thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo.
Yeah, this is my brother's company. His birthday's coming up this week, so happy birthday, Richard, June 15th. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday, Richard. And as we mentioned before, do check out The Same Difference Jazz Standard Podcast. There'll be a link to it in the description, and once we finish up talking here, their promo will follow after that, so we can round out your jazz listening for the week.
There's a there's a famous line in an Italian movie, Alberto Sordi, where he's kind of trying to eat like an American, and he decides he can't do that, and he's got this plate of pasta, and he says to the plate of pasta, like, you know, I didn't like the way you looked at me, so now I'm going to have to kill you. And he eats the plate of pasta. And I'm eyeing my recordings for next week thinking the same thing.
Oh,
don't like the way they're looking at me, so now I'm going to have to like just devour them and listen to them
Get
all.
an early start.
Right.
So have a good week of listening, and we'll see you again next week with some cello, sax, and big band, all for episode 120.
Same difference. 2 jazz fans, 1 jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.